This is CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
President Clinton had said that he would work up until the last minutes of his presidency. About 2 hours left of the Clinton era, and apparently there are some presidential pardons being handed down. With more on that, let's go to Kelly Wallace, who's at the White House. Kelly.
Well, that's exactly right, Darren. We've been waiting for those this morning, and CNN has learned of the final executive actions that Mr. Clinton will be taking, and those include these presidential pardons. We've been talking about two key Whitewater figures who had been out there requesting pardons. We understand, and CNN has learned, that President Clinton has granted a pardon for Susan McDougal. She was the Clintons' business partner back in that Arkansas land venture called Whitewater. She ended up serving some time for some felonies. She also served about 18 months in prison when she would not testify before a federal grand jury, which was impaneled by then independent counsel Kenneth Starr. As for the other Whitewater figure, Webster Hubbell, CNN has learned that Mr. Clinton has not granted a pardon for him. He was Mrs. Clinton's law partner back in Arkansas, excuse me. He was convicted of a number of things, including tax evasion. He did serve about 15 months in prison. Again, though, not a pardon for him. Other names that had been out there: Michael Milken, former junk bond king. Democratic fundraisers had been pushing for a pardon for him. CNN has learned he will not be granted a pardon. The same with Leonard Peltier. Not a pardon from him, according to sources we've talked to. He, of course, has been convicted of murdering two FBI agents back in 1975. FBI groups actually protested outside the White House a couple of weeks ago, urging Mr. Clinton not to grant a pardon. Other names that are interesting: Roger Clinton, the president's brother. He has been pardoned for some drug charges stemming from back in the 1980s. Also, former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Henry Cisneros pardoned. He had entered a plea agreement for some charges related to some payments to a girlfriend. And one other name, Patty Hearst, has been granted a pardon by President Clinton. President and Mrs. Carter, former President and Mrs. Carter, have been pushing a pardon for her. We're told more than 100 pardons coming from the president, and those are just some of the names that are the most high-profile figures that we have for you. Darren?
So, Kelly, are all the pardons the president's going to grant, are they all in, or this is just the beginning?
This is it. We're waiting for the paper with the list of names. Again, we're told more than 100, or well over 100. Many are not household names, not people that you or I have probably know about. A lot of them are people convicted of drugs, under drug charges, these mandatory minimums, the president feeling that they had served their time, basically allowing them to go on and live their lives after serving their time. So again, not a lot of names that you'll be familiar with. We should get that list in about 10 minutes.
One name we were very familiar with, but I have to say, surprised when we heard you say Patty Hearst has been granted a pardon. We all up here on the set kind of looked at each other and said, that look of really? Do we even know that she was lobbying for a presidential pardon?
It's a surprise to me as well. Did not know. According to one person I talked to, again, as I reported, that apparently former President and Mrs. Carter had been pushing this, something that the president had granted. Obviously, President Clinton has nice relations, of course, with former President Carter, really respects him and the role he has played as a former president. Not sure if that played any role. White House officials are saying that the president, really, these were real heartfelt decisions for him. All were very weighty. They have big effects on people's lives and other people's lives. So not something he took lightly, again, but that is a decision that has come in now.
Kelly Wallace, thank you very much for that breaking news. Once again, President Clinton in his final hours as president, granting pardons to Susan McDougal, Roger Clinton, his brother, Henry Cisneros, and Patty Hearst as well. Thank you. Now to Bill.
You mentioned Susan McDougal, Webster Hubbell, not pardoned today. CNN's Bob Franken. Both of these names go back to the Whitewater days. Your reaction now to what we're hearing out of the White House?
No, first of all, Susan McDougal was found guilty in the first Whitewater trial. She and her late husband, Jim McDougal, were partners in that obscure real estate project, the Whitewater Land Development Company, which was at the core of the investigation that spread all the way to the Monica Lewinsky matter before it was through. She, in fact, had refused to testify before a grand jury about conversations with President Clinton. For that, she served at 18 months in prison for contempt of court. So the president probably has warm feelings toward her. Her lawyer, Mark Aragos, has been lobbying very hard to try and get her a pardon, was told last night that the president would sleep on it. Now, Susan McDougal now will have her record cleared in effect. She is somebody who was very defiant as the independent counsel investigation went on. She had been convicted in that Whitewater trial of charges stemming from a fraudulent $300,000 loan taken from the federal government. President Clinton was implicated in that loan by some of the witnesses, but in fact the connection was never made, and she refused to testify about it. Now, Webster Hubbell was a former law partner in the Rose Law Firm with Hillary Rodham Clinton. He was really convicted of something that was quite peripheral to the Whitewater investigation. It had to do with his bilking clients while he was a member of that law firm. He was also under pressure from the independent counsel from day one to give information that might implicate President or Mrs. Clinton in wrongdoing. He absolutely refused. The independent counsel for the longest time operated on the premise that he was getting hush money. There was an investigation that led to other tax charges that were eventually plea bargained. Webster Hubbell, who lives now in Washington, had been the number 3 man at the Justice Department when he ran into the legal trouble. He was known to be seeking a pardon. Of course, he cannot practice law now. That pardon has apparently not been granted, but it's interesting, at the end of the Clinton presidency, we're getting an end to some of the remaining questions that have to do with the investigations against Bill Clinton. Of course, yesterday, Bill Clinton, in effect, gave his bargain with the independent counsel, admitting wrongdoing in testimony in the Paula Jones case, which was all part of these investigations. In return, he got a guarantee that he would not be indicted. So as the presidency closes, the headlines are about the various investigations.
Bob, quickly, let's go back to the issue of Susan McDougal. You referred to it. Some thought it was a quid pro quo. Susan McDougal stays quiet. In return, she protects the president. How is this to be perceived now that the slate is being wiped clean for her legally?
You know, I think people are tired of perceiving this. I think they really don't want to think about it anymore. That was really one of the factors that went into the arrangement between the independent counsel Bob Ray yesterday and the president. There is a general belief that people really want to put this to bed, that it's all over. So I think it's going to be something that's going to be met with a, that's interesting, and that's about it.
All right, Bob Franken with us in Washington. Bob, thanks. More coming up with you shortly. But now here's Darren.
Yeah, we continue our conversation about these pardons just handed down by President Clinton, Susan McDougal, Roger Clinton, Henry Cisneros, and Patty Hearst. Let's bring in our senior White House correspondent, John King. John, any of the names on this list that you would think might bring a backlash?
Oh, certainly there will be criticism. If you're the prosecutor who put Susan McDougal in jail, you will criticize that. If you're the prosecutor who ran the case against Henry Cisneros, the former housing secretary, you might criticize that. But the ones that had been considered the most controversial by the White House, we do not see on this list. Mr. Peltier, he was convicted of killing FBI agents. There were protests by FBI agents outside the White House gates when they found out he was on the list of possible pardons. Senior aides tell us that was never seriously under consideration. One other name we're not hearing on this list, apparently, Jonathan Pollard. He convicted of spying for Israel. Jewish activists in this country had argued this president should give Mr. Pollard a pardon. The Israeli government had argued in favor of a pardon. Mr. Clinton apparently deciding once again, not to pardon Mr. Pollard. Those were the names that would have caused the most controversy. Some critics will say this is a president in the very end trying to help some of his friends out politically, but none of the names we hear today likely to cause much of a backlash except for those involved in those specific cases.
John, thank you very much. And we go from John King back to St. John's Episcopal Church. The service is over. We just saw President and Mrs. Bush coming out, and there I believe that's Dick Cheney and his wife Lynn Cheney. From here, the entourage, Lisa Bushes, go from the church. From the church, they go over to the White House, and we have our Kate Snow standing by just outside the church. Kate.
That's right, Darren. We just saw President and Barbara Bush leaving. We saw some of the family members leaving. They will head over to a coffee now, George W. Bush at the White House. This church service lasted a brief half hour. That was the plan, and they are keeping to their schedule pretty closely here. It was led by Rector Luis Leon of the St. John's Episcopal Church. We understand that there were prayers said for the president-elect, and that there was a homily, which is similar to a sermon, delivered. The church here has a lot of history. We've talked about this throughout the morning. This is called the President's Church, also known, by the way, as the Yellow Church for obvious reasons. The church has been here since 1816 when it was built
James Madison, the first president to come here, and every president since then has come at least on one occasion to visit St. John's. George Bush Sr., the President Bush, was here quite a number of times. He was quite an occasional visitor to St. John's. He enjoyed coming here, I was told by the administrator of the church yesterday. And in fact, he had a connection at one point with a homeless man who had come to the church. George Bush, President Bush, invited the homeless man to come in with him and pray with him. And that connection started a friendship. That man ended up coming to the church from then on until when he died about 4 months ago. And he's now buried outside of the church. So there's a long history between the Bush family and this church. Inside there are pews, there are kneelers that are embroidered. One of them has the name George Bush, President Bush's kneeler, and that was placed in front of George W. Bush today for him during the service. He sat right up front, I'm told, in the first pew to watch the service. And again, they'll head to the White House now from here. The service still breaking up. About 60 people attended the service here this morning. A fitting beginning for George W. Bush. He's a man who has talked often about being deeply religious, the importance of religion in his life. So a logical way for him to start this important day. Darren.
Kate, I'm going to interrupt you here just a moment because I don't know if you can see what our viewers are seeing on television, but we're seeing James Baker, a man who's been known for public life a lot over the years, but also especially during the recent Florida controversy. He was the main spokesman for the Bush campaign in Florida. Also Jack Kemp and his wife. And as we look, as the people pouring out of the church here, let's go ahead and bring back in Bob Dallek, our historian who made it into our studio atop the Labor Department with us. You're watching yet another historic day, and this is your business. What are you taking away from a historical standpoint as you watch this church service come to a close?
Well, what's striking, Darren, is the extent to which these are symbolic moments. Inaugurations, the departure of a president. What I'm reminded of is when Lyndon Johnson ended his presidency, he did it with an executive order naming a national park in Alaska for Franklin Roosevelt. It was the arc of LBJ's career. Bill Clinton pardoning Patty Hearst, there's a kind of arc to his career going back to the 60s, the counterculture, all the turmoil. Clinton got his start in politics over that. And now this service at the church is an expression of something that goes back to the beginning of our history. The interest in calling on the divinity to support the president, to give him strength and courage to lead the nation. And we'll hear some of that, I'm sure, in his inaugural speech, because these are moments for celebrating the past and looking to the future. And I think it's a wonderful symbolic moment, and also that we see so many familiar faces coming out of the church.
That we do. Faces from the past and the future as well.
Some of the first faces that came out, the two daughters, Barbara and Jenna, many people may not be quite familiar with them yet because they have been somewhat shielded throughout this entire campaign. And Laura Bush, in an interview earlier this week here on CNN, in fact, it was with Wolf Blitzer, was talking about how Chelsea was protected by Bill and Hillary Clinton, and also that the press, the media, had extended that level of respect toward them, and she expressed her desire to make sure that that could be repeated for her two daughters as well.
Yeah, and I think that's understandable, and it gives the young women a chance to grow up and to be a little bit out of the spotlight. You know, they're there in the fishbowl. It's a very difficult business. It's difficult for the president and the first lady, and so at least give a pass to the children and let them develop at their own pace and their own time, and their schooling and their studies. They're under the gun in a sense enough. They'll have secret service protection all the time at
their first year at college.
First year at college, yeah. And how normal a life can you possibly have?
Not very.
It's what I sometimes wonder at is why anybody wants to run for this office. As Thomas Jefferson said, it's a splendid misery, and as George Bush will no doubt learn.
Absolutely. We're keeping our eyes on the church door because we are waiting for George W. Bush and Laura Bush to come out. It seems like just about everybody else in their entourage we've seen, except them.
And the other interesting picture we're going to get today is when the Bushes do move over to the White House in a matter of moments, and they will be meeting with the outgoing first family and also the vice president and his wife Tipper. Talk to us about the tradition of this transitional period at the White House where they will gather for coffee or tea and then proceed up to the Capitol.
Bill, it expresses the idea of American consensus, and it goes back to Thomas Jefferson, who in his first inaugural said, differences of opinion do not necessarily amount to differences of principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. And what
Meaning a different meaning Republican than it means today.
Yes, of course. But what it tells you is that that was the first transfer of constitutional authority. Jefferson was mindful of that. He was speaking to that point, that we don't have, you lose an election, you call on your supporters to go up into the hills. You don't have violence. What you have is consensus, acceptance of the proposition that the torch is being passed. A lot of these presidents and ex-presidents didn't like each other. Truman and Eisenhower didn't like each other. Ike didn't think all that well of Jack Kennedy, but they're very respectful toward each other, and it's a demonstration of the fact that we are all Americans. We're going to see protests in the street today, and this is rare at an inauguration. It's not very common. It's an expression of the continuing anger and frustration over the way in which the election came out and also how close it was. So those tensions in some ways are understandable, but it's really the exception rather than the rule, because for the most part we celebrate today rather than continue our polemics.
Even with the way the election played out, and even with some of the bitter feelings that are out there among the protesters and across the country, do you think we as Americans take for granted this peaceful transfer of power? Of course, it's election day, and of course one guy leaves and another guy comes in. Yep. Not many countries around the world where you see it happen that way.
One could look at the Philippines right now.
Exactly. This is what makes America unique and so attractive. And remember what Winston Churchill said: democracy is the worst possible system except for all the rest. And it works. However flawed and limited it is, it works, and we have a marvelous system, and we should be proud of it.
Bob Dallek, thank you very much. As we're watching the pictures at St. John's Church, and there's another stop at the White House, action already starting to take place on Capitol Hill, and our Candy Crowley is there. Candy. Candy, can you hear us?
There I can hear you. Okay. I'm on an RF here, so it goes out every once in a while. We're beginning to crowd up here, I can tell you. I don't know if you can see sort of to my right and up behind me, but the governors have all come. I'm looking at my watch thinking this is going to be a long couple of hours until they see the president-elect and the outgoing president. A little chilly here, but warming up with all the people coming in. Karl Rove, the president-elect's political strategist, Karen Hughes, one of his personal deputies who's been with him ever since he ran for governor the first time around, have all started to gather on the stage. Was interested a little while ago talking about the girls, as the president-elect calls his twin daughters. Part of their wanting to shield these young women from the press corps and really from a lot of the fanfare comes from the girls themselves. We rarely, I think I can count 2 times that I actually saw the Bush daughters during the campaign. In fact, they wanted to go off to college like normal young women, and again going to separate colleges, one's at UT, one's at Yale, and live their life as free from this as possible. They, in fact, didn't want their father to run, and were quite outspoken about it, we are led to believe. He chose the time to give them a fatherly lesson about causes larger than themselves, and of course ignored their advice. But they're very sensitive to the fact that these young women would like their life to their own. They thought, again, that the press corps did a fairly good job of staying away from Chelsea Clinton, and are hoping for the same for Jenna and Barbara, their daughters.
Candy, the Clintons did ask for privacy for Chelsea Clinton, and the media did cooperate with that. You're a member of the press corps that does follow the first families. Do you think that respect will continue?
I do. In fact, it continued all during the campaign. I can tell you that the Bush campaign is not helpful about the daughters, but there also there was an understanding that these were not questions that were asked. Obviously, they showed up for the convention, but you would have lost them during the convention with all the people that were on the stage. I mean, they did come to observe a couple of nights, but when they were on the stage, they don't look at all alike, and it's hard to spot them in the crowd. They also showed up on Super Tuesday in Texas, but they have been very scarce, and it is both their wish and the wish of their parents, and so far I think that they believe, at least the Bushes believe, that the press corps has respected those wishes.
All right, Candy Crowley from Capitol Hill, thanks again. We're watching the front facade of St. John's Church, the Church of the Presidents, the President-elect and his wife Laura, the future First Lady
future being 1 hour and 41 minutes from now. Bob Dallek, presidential historian, back with us once again. And we heard from Kelly Wallace a short time ago about what we will anticipate with certain excerpts from the speech. A couple things I want to point out and get your reaction to it. It is expected, and this is quoting now from excerpts lifted from the incoming president's speech, what you do is as important as anything government does. I ask you to be citizens, citizens not spectators, citizens not subjects. What comes to mind when you hear such prose?
Well, it reminds us of Ronald Reagan's invocation of the idea that government is not the solution, government is the problem. His father, George Bush, his former president, who spoke so much about 1,000 points of light, volunteerism, the idea that the government can't do everything for everybody, and that what you need is a kind of individual effort and a pulling together, the emphasis on community, the emphasis on the idea that you should contribute to the national well-being. And it's reminiscent of John Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So one sees certain striking themes here which may have been drawn from past inaugurations and past administrations.
And true, the tale of the tape for any inaugural speech is not necessarily what happens that day. It's more something that develops over time and in the months and years to come as we reflect back upon it.
Absolutely. And in fact, Bill, most of the inaugural speeches are not memorable. There are maybe 4 in the country's history. I can be pedantic and start giving you a lecture on the floor.
Yeah, there you go.
You could.
Abe Lincoln, FDR, John F. Kennedy. Who
right.
am I missing?
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson.
The first inaugural he gave. But yeah, these inaugural speeches are not, in concrete. They don't tell you exactly what's going to happen. They're very general. They're very abstract in some ways. They're an appeal to the past, an appeal to the future. But you find out over the next 100 days, 2 months, 3 months, 4, 5, 6 months. It takes time till you see what kind of presidency you're going to be having.
Interesting fact we just put up on the screen, the role of the president, that job's getting a raise. George W. Bush will be the first president to make $400,000 a year. That's twice what President Clinton made.
Yep. And if you compare, somebody was pointing out the other day that Bill Clinton's salary was less than probably what Benjamin Harrison got in 1889, you see, in comparative dollars, you see. So Bill wasn't very well paid, but he's going to make up for it. Don't worry.
In pension, he'll make up for it.
Yeah, pension is good, but the lecture fees.
Yeah, the lecture fees. He'll be just fine.
1789, it was $25,000 for George Washington.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of money in those days.
As we sit here and wait for, again, the man of the hour to emerge from this church here, is it possible to get inside of his head, to get inside of his body, to think about what he is feeling right now?
Yeah. Well, I would hope he's feeling a little apprehension.
He's got a big job ahead of him.
He's got a big job ahead of him. But also you hope that he has the kind of confidence that Franklin Roosevelt, for example, had. FDR, they said, FDR's idea of the presidency was Franklin Roosevelt in the White House. He was a man of sublime confidence. And he said when his head hit the pillow at night, he went right to sleep. Didn't question what he did during the day. So you kind of hope that a president has that kind of self-confidence, that feeling that, look, I'm doing my best, and if things don't turn out perfectly, so be it. I'll keep going. And presidents always stumble. They always run into terrible difficulties. Franklin Roosevelt did. Think of Lincoln. Imagine the burden that he had to shoulder and the inner confidence that he must have had. He had great faith in the country, faith in his God. It served him magnificently. So you need a kind of strength, I think, to do this job. And Jefferson also said, no one emerges from this position with his reputation fully intact, because you folks in the press, you go after these guys, hammer and tongs, and of course that's your job, is to tell us what is going on.
The splendid misery.
That's right, the splendid misery.
Absolutely. Bob, we're going to have you stand by and stay with us. We want to show our folks at home that we have cameras all over the nation's capital. That small box right there is in front of St. John's Church. We're waiting for President-elect George W. Bush and his wife Laura to come out. We've already seen his parents come out, his daughters come out, and a number of people from his family and entourage. And then, of course, the big box there is from the Capitol, from the west side of the Capitol. About an hour and 23 minutes. What do you have, Bill?
Hour and 36 minutes.
Okay. I'm telling time the wrong way.
That's all right. We had expected the crowd estimates certainly are hard to gather at this point, but they had said anywhere between 500,000 and 700,000. But certainly, if you've been with us throughout the week, and especially this weekend, you know that Mother Nature is not shining brightly on Washington, D.C., and certainly that will dictate a lot of the numbers that either do or do not turn out today.
You know, easy for us to say from inside, but I do have to say, as cold and wet and damp, as miserable as it is outside, it doesn't appear to be raining as hard as it was yesterday, and maybe that'll have an effect on folks whether they make that call. Do they come out and see the 43rd president? I think we're getting word that he's coming out of the church. There he is. George W. Bush and Laura Bush coming out to a round of applause outside St. John's Church, the president's church.
Again, as they climb into their limousine and head back to the White House, they will be meeting these four people right here. This is the outgoing president and vice president, along with the First Lady and the vice president's wife, Tipper Gore. One final photo opportunity at the White House, now just about an hour away before the motorcade heads up Pennsylvania Avenue, 1.5 miles up to the Capitol.
You have to imagine this is not an easy day for the vice president, for Al Gore, and a lot of people, I know when I was talking about coming up for the inauguration, people saying, oh, does Al Gore have to go to the swearing in? Bob Dallek, maybe you can comment on that. This is part of tradition. This is part of the gig, you might say. When you sign up to be vice president, part of it is, even though he knew that he might not win, he would have to have this day.
Absolutely. It's very frustrating. Imagine any of us having run for that office, the energy you've expended, the time, the emotional commitment, and then to lose, and not only lose, but lose in the way he lost. I mean, by this paper-thin margin. He must be replaying this presidential election night after night. But this is his role, and he knows that as a public figure, he goes to the ceremony, he congratulates the incoming president, and it does him honor, as it did when he gave his concession speech. That may have been one of the best speeches he gave, if not the best speech he gave in his whole career. And it marks him out not only as a gentleman, but as someone who can run again in 2004. Now, I don't know that he will, I don't know that he should, but it gives him a kind of credibility, a kind of standing with the public, which is very good politics.
And to go to your point even more, Darren, there's been very few occasions, Bob, where a president or a vice president has skipped the inauguration, the swearing in, et cetera. You look at John Adams with Thomas Jefferson in 1801, and very few other instances come to mind.
And even though, as I said before, even though there are tensions often between the outgoing and incoming presidents, they understand what the ceremonial function is. You know, our presidents are both our kings and our prime ministers. And as king, you play a particular role and you speak to the symbols. Reagan was marvelous at that, very hands-off as a president, not that a stronger prime minister, but magnificent as our king, as our symbolic
showing
president.
that the country is indeed always stronger than the man.
Exactly.
And as we sit here and continue our discussion, we also have the camera showing history rolling on. This is the beginning of the motorcade, of the Bush motorcade, making its way from St. John's Church to the White House, where, as we just saw in a live picture a couple minutes ago, waiting for the Bushes will be President Clinton and Vice President Al Gore and their wives.
I believe, if my research serves me correctly, the 6 of them, the 8 of them actually, will be meeting in the Blue Room. And if you've ever taken a tour of the White House, we all know where that is. Kelly Wallace on the front lawn now. Kelly, hello.
Yes, Bill, I am standing here, and it looks like the President-elect and Mrs. Bush are just about to arrive here. As you both have been mentioning, it is an extraordinary political moment here. You have Mr. and Mrs. Bush coming to the White House, being greeted by the man who defeated his father, President Clinton, defeating former President Bush 8 years ago. Also, Mr. and Mrs. Bush going to be spending time, the most significant amount of time they'll be spending with Mr. and Mrs. Gore. Of course, we know that is a difficult situation for the Vice President. Obviously, it will be the first time that they've spent any extensive time here. Mr. Bush and the Vice President did meet for about 10 minutes back in December. There you see the President and the First Lady smiling, taking some pictures. Really, the clock is ticking for them. Just about a half hour or so, they will be bidding farewell to the place they've called home for the past 8 years. And this is over at the North Portico, right at the entrance to the White House. And there you see outgoing President and First Lady getting ready to greet the 2 people that will be taking their place here in the White House.
former president and President Bush in just a short time. Mr. Clinton obviously had hoped to hand off to a Democratic successor. Vice President Al Gore is inside as well, but instead he hands over the White House to a Republican and the son of the man that he inherited the White House from just 8 years ago. Mr. Clinton tells friends privately he was very impressed with the president-elect during their private discussion at the White House when President-elect Bush still paid a courtesy call some time ago. He says that the incoming president asked many questions about how the White House was organized, how the President Clinton, went about communicating with the American people. So the traditional coffee inside now, then these two men will go up to the inaugural ceremonies. A remarkable day for President Clinton as well. He said last week that he was sleeping 1 or 2 hours a night because he didn't want to sleep in his final week as president. He wanted to be awake, be active, and enjoy the White House and his work until the last possible minute. Here
John
you see...
King?
Sorry,
Go ahead, John.
You see Mr. Cheney walking into the White House now with his wife, Lynn. Alan Tipper Gore, the vice president, greeting them there. And we'll head inside it. Well, another very difficult moment for the vice president. He has been in the public eye, obviously, since he conceded the election. He had to preside over the Senate and the Congress during the Electoral College proceedings. Now he's escorting the Cheneys into the White House here. A very difficult moment for him, a man who won the popular vote by more than 500,000 votes, yet will not be the president of the United States. The big question now, what next for Al Gore? He says he will take a little time to reflect and then make his decision about whether he wants to, say, begin running again in the 2004 election. A very difficult moment for him here as the transition of power takes place over at the White House.
All right, John King, stand by here in Washington. Again, rather interesting juxtaposition with the different people and the different personalities certainly coming in. And one thinks back to the first 100 days of the Clinton presidency, and Bob Bellick, if we go back to that point, there were some rough spots that needed to be ironed out. And interestingly enough, when you talk to the main players in the White House at that time, they talk about how tough that transition was for them, almost as if they were not fully prepared for that moment.
Yes. I don't think anybody can ever be fully prepared for assuming that office, however experienced the staff is. But of course, Jimmy Carter had a staff from Georgia. Bill Clinton had a staff from Arkansas. These were not people who were all that knowledgeable about the workings of Washington politics, and particularly the White House. It's a tremendous burden and challenge. People work 18 and 20-hour days in order to come to grips with, and a lot of these people around Bill Clinton, very young as well, they should be, because you need the energy to address these kinds of tasks and demands. So it's a very difficult business.
There's been so much that is different about the Clinton presidency, and that will continue even to the moment and the moments after they leave, and how they leave. I mean, they're really not leaving. No. They are going to get in a helicopter and go to Andrews Air Force Base. Yep. I think it has been yet to be decided if Hillary Clinton, now Senator Clinton, will actually be going and leaving Washington, because let's be frank, they're just moving down the street to a house that's very close to where the vice president will be living.
Are they going to New York? Are they staying here?
Or DC?
You know that Bill Clinton this morning made a Saturday morning radio address? Yeah. I mean, he can't let go. I would anticipate we're going to be hearing a lot from him in the future. Indeed, I saw a copy of a speech he gave the other day in which he spoke to the fact that his two models for the post-presidential career are Jimmy Carter on the one hand and John Quincy Adams on the other. Now, what did Quincy Adams do? He ran for the House of Representatives and spent a long and successful career in the House. I can well imagine Bill Clinton running for mayor of New York or running for a Senate seat from Arkansas.
Well, he seemed to allude to that the other day, that might not, Mrs. Clinton might not be the only senator.
No, that's right. So I wouldn't be surprised if we keep hearing from him for a while.
Hang on a second here, Bob.
Sure.
Kelly Wallace back at the White House Live. Kelly, what's happening now?
Well, Bill, this handed off to me by my colleague, Major Garrett. You know, it's a tradition for the outgoing president to leave a handwritten note for the incoming president. And we understand that President Clinton has, in fact, left his handwritten note for his successor. It'll be sitting on his desk in the Oval Office. Also, Chief of Staff John Podesta has left a note for his successor, Andy Card, and Jake Seward leaving a note for Ari Fleischer, who will become the new press secretary here at the White House. One other interesting note, many of our viewers may have been aware of an interesting story out there, rumors that Sox and Buddy were not not getting along, and maybe they would have to split up when the first family left the White House. Well, we have in fact learned that Sox will be going to live with Betty Curry, that is Mr. Clinton's personal assistant, and that Buddy will be going with the first family to Chappaqua. The president was joking earlier this week, saying it was more difficult to resolve this dispute than the problems between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Clearly, he was not able to reconcile the differences. Sox will go one place and Buddy elsewhere.
And we will follow along. Kelly Wallace, thanks. Stand by there. I want to bring in now a man who's quite close with the Clinton administration. Don Baer, former communications director, live with us in Washington. Don, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
What's happening in the Blue Room right now between these 8 individuals?
Oh, I'm sure they're all being very cordial with one another. It's obviously could be a tense situation given the nature of the people who are there. But I think they are all being very friendly and open. And the Clintons and the Gores, I have no doubt, are doing everything they can to be as gracious as possible.
What do you make of the pardons we heard 35 minutes ago from the White House? Susan McDougal, yes. Patty Hearst, yes. Roger Clinton, yes. Your take on this?
Well, it's interesting. Some of these are people very personal to the president, obviously. I remember I was a reporter before I worked at the White House, and first long interview I ever did with Bill Clinton was 10 years ago in 1991. And we talked then about the toughest thing he said he had ever had to do as governor of Arkansas was in the mid-1980s when the Highway Patrol and state investigative people came to him and said they were investigating his brother on drug charges. And they asked him, do you want us to go forward with this investigation or not, Governor? And he said, you have to go forward, do it. He knew his brother was going to be arrested and could never tell his brother about it. Very tough family matter. That's an interesting one. I think Susan McDougal, obviously someone with whom the president and Mrs. Clinton go back a long, long way. I thought it was interesting that apparently Webb Hubbell not on that list. You know,
interesting how?
Well, again, from a personal standpoint, if you think about it, Hillary Rodham Clinton, Webb Hubbell, and a third person, Vince Foster, the late Vince Foster, were the 3 stalwarts at the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, Arkansas in the 1980s. Foster and Hubbell came with the Clintons to Washington. We know Vince Foster, of course, committed suicide in 1993. Webb Hubbell paid a huge price. I would tell you, I think there must have been some compelling arguments, legal arguments, for not granting Webb Hubbell a pardon if Clinton did not do it. So they're all interesting. Henry Cisneros also receiving a pardon.
Correct. Yeah.
President Clinton's hands-down favorite cabinet member of the entire 8 years, someone he was very close with politically, intellectually, and personally. I'm sure he feels good about being able to do that for Henry Cisneros.
Don, hang on one second. I want to show our viewers the newest limousine. It was put into service this past Monday. It's just arrived outside the White House. Again, this will get some use not only today, but going forward as well. Don, as we look at this picture, I want to bring back to the Clinton legacy that has been talked about so often over the past 3 or 4 months. Let's tick through a couple things. Number one, what's the best thing Bill Clinton did in 8 years?
Well, I think the best thing is a large thing, in that I believe he made the American presidency relevant and robust again for the new century. You know, you have to remember 8, 9 years ago, people weren't looking to the presidency in the post-Cold War period to have much of an impact in their day-to-day lives. And I don't think there's much disagreement that Bill Clinton, by working very, very hard at it over these years, has made the presidency something that is very important and strong in people's lives. And that's a big deal.
Given that, Don, what's the biggest disappointment?
Oh, I think the biggest disappointment, certainly the Lewinsky scandal and the taint that will always leave, is a huge disappointment. But I think beyond that, the things that didn't get done because of that.
Then, Don, frame up this plea that was reached yesterday. No indictment. However, Mr. Clinton surrenders the right to practice law in Arkansas for the next 5 years. He pays a fine, $25,000. How does that fit into the current framework?
Well, I think from everyone's standpoint, it's a good thing to have it behind us now. I think the country wants it behind us. Certainly the Clintons did not want to go into the next chapter of their lives thinking about a 1 or 2 year trial and dealing with all of that. The Bush administration, the new Bush administration, didn't want to have to think about having to give him a pardon. I think from everyone's standpoint, putting an end to that chapter of our political history makes a lot of sense now.
Don, quickly here in the 15 seconds we have left, take us 10 years down the road. How is this presidency remembered?
I think it will be remembered as having been a good, strong presidency. America is stronger, richer, and better today than it was when Bill Clinton came into office, and I think he will get a lot of credit for helping people begin to make the transition into the 21st century that is going to be a remarkable time.
Don Baer, former White House Communications Director. I know you've been waiting a long time in our bureau. We appreciate your patience this morning, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
And from our bureau, we go back now to our live pictures, which our cameras are all over Washington, D.C. Right now, as we speak, Mr. and Mrs. Bush and the Cheneys are also inside the White House having the traditional coffee and tea with the Clintons and also with the Gores. They came from St. John's Episcopal Church for a traditional Inauguration Day ceremony. With more on that, what was said inside the church, which was closed to the media and also to cameras, we have our Kate Snow standing by. Kate.
Darren, joining me is the rector of St. John's Episcopal Church, Luis Leon. He was born in Cuba, but has been in this country since the age of 12. Been with this church for 6 years.
Correct.
And I understand you did a lot of preparation for this morning to make
There's
sure.
always a lot of preparation when the president visits our
I'm
church.
sure, and he does. And presidents come here quite often. It's nothing new
But
for you.
the history of the church is since 1815, every president has worshipped at the church, so there's a good long tradition.
Tell me about this morning. You gave a homily. Tell me what the message was. What was your theme?
Really, the message was focused on a reminder to all of us that God's creation is good and that we human beings are good and that this is a good nation and they're very generous people. My experience as one of the Peter Pan children many years ago was a family that took me in and housed me, educated me, welcomed me, very generous. And I spoke about that, and I also spoke about President Lincoln, whom I admire greatly, and there were, I guess, 3 themes to it. The first one was that President Lincoln, during the Douglas-Lincoln debates, always appealed to our higher nature, and I like to think that that's why he was elected. And he asked a lot of the people, and people responded, and I appreciate that. The second one, President Lincoln never had any retribution, never, after the Civil War, he never went after the soldiers who had fought against the Union, and I thought that that's something important to remember after this particular election. And the third one, which I've always appreciated about President Lincoln, was he never said God is on our side. He was always asking the question, are we on God's side? And he called us America's almost chosen people, God's almost chosen people.
So you chose to start with those remarks about
Correct.
Abraham Lincoln.
Those are the basic themes of the...
Yeah, you said George W. Bush spoke with you right afterwards.
Yes.
What was that conversation about?
We chatted a little, introduced ourselves to each other, and he also said to me that part of what I said were some of the themes he was going to be speaking about today during his inaugural address. He too admires President Lincoln, and he had read some of the same excerpts that I had. So he said they were to listen to it because they were going to, my words were going to be echoed.
Did he mention anything about religion being important to him? I know he's spoken at length in the past about his religious beliefs.
No, he didn't. We didn't have the opportunity to speak about that. So we had a very brief conversation as he was about to depart the church, and he made
fitting beginning to a very important day. Thank you so much for joining us, Rector Luis Leon from the Episcopal St. John's Church, the President's Church. We'll send it back to you, Bill and Darren.
Kate Snow, thank you very much. And the day goes on, the day of history from St. John's Church to where the presidential entourage is now, inside the White House. President-elect George W. Bush and his wife Laura meeting with President Clinton and now Senator Clinton. Also the Gores and the Cheneys there as well. We'll have more ahead of our coverage. We're going to get a quick break in, and our coverage continues after this.
E-learning is critical for global business. It is the future,
Centra is creating a new world
where people can interact,
collaborate, and learn.
in virtual classrooms, online workspaces,
web conferences, and e-meetings. Software that harnesses the power of corporate networks and the internet.
Software to help people
Work together.
In real time.
getting more done in less time.
Centra.
The leader in live e-learning.
Now save $555. Call your travel agent or 1-800-BEACHES.
Dear Clarice, are you back on the case? If so, goody goody. Because I need some action, Clarice. I need to come out of retirement and return to public life. Regards, your old pal, Hannibal Lecter.
Rated R. Starts February 9th.
Chrysler Town and Country. Re-engineered and redesigned with over 80 available safety and security features. Chrysler Town and Country. The best minivan ever. Now get $1,000 cash allowance on Chrysler Town and Country.
Once again, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We do anticipate in about 45 minutes' time a motorcade will carry the outgoing president and vice president along with their wives and the incoming president and vice president with their wives straight up Pennsylvania Avenue to Capitol Hill. Speaking of Capitol Hill, that's where we turn our attention now. Our bureau chief here in Washington, Frank Sesno, now joins us. Frank, good morning to you.
Good morning, Bill, and of course a great day of history and anticipation here on Capitol Hill. Behind me, perhaps you can hear the University of Louisville Choir. They're performing. The House of Representatives, they've already arrived here on the west front of the United States Capitol, the United States Senate, and other dignitaries shortly to arrive. The weather appears to be getting a little worse out here, a steady drizzle, the wind picking up just a bit and the temperature's a bit raw. We're hoping that the rain itself holds off. I'm joined here by Senator Chuck Hagel, a Republican of Nebraska. He's been kind enough to brave the elements with us and to join us. And I'd like to talk to you with you for a bit about both what you anticipate, not just today, but beyond. We come to this event at a time of a very divided, contested election, and this is about calling for a unified nation that we're going to be hearing from the new president.
Well, Frank, as I said before, you'd almost have to be dead not to feel the enthusiasm and the spirit of once again renewing our democracy. So a good amount of goodwill always emanates from inauguration of a new president and a peaceful transition of power. But then we get to the real heavy lifting, as you note. I think there will be a good, strong bipartisan sense of trying to cooperate and get some things done over the next 2 years.
Not only is the new president, going to utter his first words, you're going to be doing your first bit of business in just a few hours. Confirmation.
We're going to confirm 6 of President-elect Bush's cabinet members at 3 o'clock this afternoon. That will start to get this government in place, and they can get on about the business of governing.
Right, Senator Chuck Hagel, appreciate it. And so, great deal of anticipation and some work to be done, along with the first words of the new president, George W. Bush. Back to you, Bill.
All right, Frank, thank you. And for our viewers, you're looking inside a live picture now of the White House as a number of people continue to mill about in the background there. You can see them in and out. You can see President Clinton and others gathering there. It should be noted the last time that the incoming president worked in the White House, you'd have to go back to 1987, 1988. Advisor and speechwriter for his father's presidential campaign, and then did some duties there at the White House during the first part of his term before going back to Texas. Now to Darren.
Because this is such an intriguing picture, we're going to go ahead and keep that up on your television screen. Meanwhile, to the people who have decided to brave the elements and come out and see the swearing in of George W. Bush as president, we have our own Leon Harris down among the crowd. Leon.
Hi, good morning. How's it going? Listen, folks, the temperature out here really is dropping. Everything that we heard about what the weather was going to be like really has come to pass. The rain has stopped, and we see things floating around. They look like they might turn to snow, but that hasn't deterred the folks who are showing up here in droves now. Let me give you a shot of the back of the crowd. We're at the back of the west front of the Capitol, and as you can see here, the last row of seats is right in front of us, and they're pretty much filled almost to halfway now. We've got to say about half of the folks are in. We were up walking around amongst the seating area up there a little while ago, and I actually ran into a few people who said that the weather got so bad they were calling it quits. They're heading in, and as a matter of fact, they were trying to sell the tickets that they had to sit up there. There's some people back here, like some of the folks who are sitting here with us, here in the back of the standing room only crowd. And these folks, you want to see the picture of perfect preparation? Look at this. These are some of the best gloves I think I've seen out here. Where'd you get these?
It's from the United States Army.
Are they working?
Yes, they're working.
They're working pretty good?
Oh, yes, they've got 2 layers in them.
Well, you know who doesn't have any layers on? These guys. We've been watching this crew here. You guys are from where now?
South Mississippi.
How'd you get here? Did you guys drive or fly? You did fly, but did you leave your luggage at the airport or what? What happened?
Just weren't prepared.
You talking to anybody important?
Yeah. So Dad, he says
Your dad? Oh, he better be watching CNN. What does Dad have to say about his son showing up on national television in 20-degree weather with no coat on?
Says it's great.
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
You want to talk to him?
What happened to your clothes? Where's all your coats?
I got my coat on.
You have one.
We got one.
What happened?
It sucks to be me. We're just having fun.
You said it, not me. But you guys are the only one, I think, maybe the worst shape I've seen out here. But the tie, what's with the tie?
Check out the tie.
Oh, that's not even the best tie we've seen out here. We've seen some other really loud ones, but they're further back down here.
We're having the most fun out here.
Okay, you better have fun because you might be dead before the day's over with. All right. We're trying to stay warm down here and hang with it, but as you can see, temperature might be down, but the spirits are up, Darren.
All right, Leon Harris, thank you so much. Leon, good luck staying warm down there. I know you're headed down to the parade route.
14th and Penn, Freedom Plaza.
Good luck staying warm. I myself have to go doll up because I'll be covering the balls, the Texas balls for tonight. I think that's going to do it. 4 hours of coverage for us.
Yeah, good to be with you again, Miss Kagan.
With you too, my friend.
And Bernie and Judy will follow us along with Bob Dallek, Jeff Greenfield, Bill Schneider, a host of others. But today is the day, the inauguration of the 43rd president. At the age of 54, George W. Bush again will come back to the White House and succeed his father, only 8 years removed. It is history once again here in the nation's capital. We'll be here for it all throughout the day here.
The coverage continues.
For Darren Kagan, I'm Bill Hemmer. The coverage continues right after this.
Tonight in the Spin Room, Inauguration Fun plus Al Franken.
The Spin Room tonight, 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock West Coast on CNN.
It's a month of mega movies on In Demand, and you and 3 friends can rule Hollywood for a week. Live like mega movie moguls. Limo hop from a Hollywood premiere screening to a VIP studio tour to a super fashion shopping spree on Rodeo Drive. Then a power weekend on your own private yacht. Or be one of 100 first prize winners who get a fully stocked minibar. To get your entry code, order any mega movie on In Demand. Then go to indemand.com to enter. You'll be living large. With In Demand pay-per-view, you rule.
It's not the number of messages you throw out there, it's the number that hit their target that matters. Reach the people who count, your customers. Call AT&T Media Services and find out about cable advertising. Ask anyone who has used cable advertising and they'll tell you it's the best way to reach the people who buy.
This is Barbara. She is president of her investment club, and she likes to drive really, really fast. Looking for a sports car? VHIX.com. Calculate your payment schedule, or compare vehicles side by side. VHIX.com. Check out safety results, or test drive your car online. VHIX.com. Find the right car for you. VHIX.com. Roadmap to the automotive world.
What if you could be far away and still be close to everyone and everything that's important to you? If you could talk to anyone in your family the instant you thought about them? If you could have the information you need come to you when you wanted it? And you had the power to make all the pieces of your life come together more than you ever imagined. Welcome to the future. Wireless from AT&T. Your world, close at hand.
This is CNN.
This is a CNN special report. It's Inauguration Day, a day to celebrate the orderly transfer of the American presidency. But getting to this day was anything but orderly, with a raucous campaign.
Yours is phased in 8 years.
No. Capped by an election day that lasted more than a month.
It's not over. It simply is not over.
Through a national ordeal of challenges, charges, and chads. Today, we complete one volume of American history and open another as George W. Bush follows his father's footsteps into the Oval Office. This is CNN's coverage of the inauguration of George W. Bush as the 43rd President of the United States. Now, from Washington, here are Bernard Shaw, Judy Woodruff, and Jeff Greenfield.
As the grand finale of election 2000 fast approaches, George Walker Bush preparing to take the oath of office and become the 43rd President of the United States of America.
We don't have a monarchy, we don't crown a king, we inaugurate a president, and that is what will happen at precisely noon today. Power will shift in that second from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush. There's nothing else like it.
And after 8 years of a presidency where we had the first impeachment in 130 years, and 2.5 months after the first contested election in 125 years, we've come to a day where it is completely embedded tradition. Everything about it, the bunting, the Bibles, the oath, the parade route, it all links back to the past, not the least of which is a son now taking an office that his father held 8 years ago. 8 years ago. And after what we've been through, there's something powerfully reassuring about it.
And only the second time in history that that's happened, that a son has taken the position, the most powerful position in the country, if not the world, and the whole world is watching.
Watching indeed. George Washington, he started it all. 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. This is the scene at the North Portico, and our man John King is there.
Well, Bernie, we're waiting, obviously, for the Clintons, the Bushes, the Cheneys, and the Gores to make their way from the traditional greeting at the White House up to the Capitol for the ceremonies. This, not just a symbolic transfer of power, quite a substantive transfer of power. Think back 8 years ago when Bill Clinton took the White House from then President Bush. The Democrats ruled Washington then. You had a new Democratic president. The Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate. When George W. Bush, the son of the man President Clinton took over from 8 years ago, takes office today, the Republicans will run Washington. A very narrow majority in the House, a 50-50 Senate. Vice President Cheney will break ties there as we see some of the guests starting to come out of the White House. So as we celebrate the symbolism of this transfer of power today, it also means quite a bit substantively. The new Republican president will try to push a new Republican agenda through a very evenly divided Congress. Education will be priority one. His education package will go up to Capitol Hill on Tuesday. Tax cuts priority two. During the campaign, he ran saying the American people deserved a big tax cut as a matter of fairness. Now, with some evidence the economy is slowing, he's added to his pitch for a tax cut that the economy needs a little juice as well. So the new president will try to get off and running. As Jeff was mentioning, a very difficult and contested election. Indeed, the new president is the man who lost the popular vote, won a very narrow but contested victory in the Electoral College. Difficulties with the Congress. That is why we know in his speech today, with the excerpts already released, his theme will be one of reconciliation. Mr. Bush will promise to be the president of all people and appeal to Democrats to work with him.
And the place where he will make that promise is the United States Capitol on the West Front. They're standing in what has been a drizzle and a little bit of rain and then a mist. CNN's Candy Crowley. Candy.
Hi, Judy. And I'm standing here with Karen Hughes, special counselor to the president, used to be president-elect, almost president, in a new Republican wear, by the way. Karen, let me ask you just first. Personally, you've been with the governor since his first race in Texas, and here you are standing here looking out over the Capitol. What's in your head?
It's just thrilling. I walked up to the podium a minute ago and was trying to imagine what he would feel like as he walked up there, and I'm just thrilled for him. I think he'll feel a great sense of the awesome responsibility and of humility, and I think he's really looking forward to this. But it's a great day for all of us. Somebody said to me on the way in that after all the lengthy delay in the finality of the election, that he said you can finally have some emotions now, and I think that's how we're all feeling, that for a lot of us this will be a wonderful moment at which it'll really sink in that he is going to become the president.
What can you tell me about his speech, what he wants to accomplish, what's the message here in terms of the tone he wants to set?
Well, obviously it's a tone calling on the best of America and seeking to unite our country. He's worried about divisions in our country, and he's going to pledge to us that he will work every day to build a single nation of justice and opportunity. He's also going to call on us as citizens to do our part and to be citizens.
Hang on one second, Judy. We're in the middle of...
here.
Okay, sorry.
No. And so he'll call on us to work to have a nation of civility and compassion and courage and character, and to really live up to the promise that America is all about.
But do you have a worst fear here for the Bush administration and a greatest hope?
Well, I think, we tend to be optimists, as you know from covering us throughout the campaign, that if you ask the president-elect that, he would say that, no, he's focused on the full side of the glass, not the empty side. I think that obviously the hope is that we will be able to work in a constructive way here, that he will be able to, and I think I already see the foundations of that. He's working very hard to reach out to Republicans and Democrats to build consensus on issues like education, which is his top priority, and I think that he's someone who intends to do in office what he said he would do, and he's already begun the process of working with Congress to accomplish that.
Karen Hughes, thank you so much. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Back to you, Judy.
All right, Candy Crowley at the Capitol.
We are watching two locations, Capitol Hill, where the dignitaries continue arriving, and here, the north portico of the White House, where William Jefferson Clinton's presidency has less than 58 minutes left.
You know, Bernie, the meeting of the old and new presidents is not always as cheerful as it appears to be today. We're reminded that when Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt rode to the Capitol together in 1933, they exchanged no words. When Eisenhower and Truman ran, you could practically have cut the tension with a knife. There was some very bad feeling. From what we've seen so far in these pictures, even with some of the tweaking of George Bush's election by President Clinton and George Bush's promise to restore integrity to the White House, there seems at least here to be a kind of cheerfulness and civility going on.
Mm-hmm. And yet they've had some very tough things to say, if not about each other, about the process that led to George W. Bush being elected president. President Clinton reminding everyone in the last few days that it was Al Gore who won the popular vote back in November, or at least after all the counts and the recounts. And Bush mentioning just 2 days ago that he plans to bring dignity and honor back to the White House.
People continue arriving at the Capitol building, and then they come outside and come down the stairs there on the west front of the Capitol. Jeff, what you were saying, George Bush is clearly relieved that he doesn't have to deal with the matters that President Clinton addressed yesterday.
I think the idea of a new president coming into office where his predecessor was facing a possible criminal indictment would have just taken a lot of the edge off a new presidency. This, in some ways, is the best time George W. Bush or any president will have to set his tone, make his mark, set his agenda. And I think the fact that this agreement was reached to take this off the table was actually a very nice pre-inaugural gift to the new president.
Two vice presidential wives, if you will, leaving. Tipper Gore, the exiting wife of the vice president, with Lynn Cheney, who, of course, is married to Dick Cheney, who you see right here with the man who will not be president at noon today, Al Gore.
You notice that both Al Gore and Cheney got the memo on how to dress. They appear to be in twin outfits of dark suits and power red ties. And I know this will be a theme that a lot of people will hit today, but you have to wonder all through the ceremony what is going through the mind of Vice President Al Gore. So close, yet so far, if only, if only, if only.
And yet he's had since December the 13th, a month and a week to put that behind him. It still has to be difficult.
Well, for Gore and for Lieberman, this is a day of stiff upper lips.
These are some of the people arriving at the Capitol. I believe we're looking at Colin Powell, other members of the cabinet, none of them yet confirmed by the Senate. In fact, that will begin this afternoon. There is Colin Powell. He is scheduled to be voted on by the Senate and confirmed. Now leaving the White House, Hillary Rodham Clinton, Senator Clinton, the exiting First Lady with the incoming First Lady, Laura Bush.
And Mrs. Clinton said she would follow the precedent set by other presidents and leave a note for Laura Bush.
Under a pillow.
I don't know whether to be under the pillow or in the desk drawer or what, but she said she would leave a note for the incoming First Lady.
The two, it is tradition, as we've been discussing here, for the two presidents, the outgoing and incoming, to meet for coffee, tea, for about 20 or 30 minutes. It's not a long period of time that they spend together because, Jeff, as you were just saying, that's an awkward situation.
Well, it can be, you know, when President Reagan turned it over to Vice President Bush, I'm sure that was pretty cordial. I mean, his candidate had won. It was the Reagan third term. I'm sure.
But when it's a change of parties, as we have now, and here they are.
John King.
Well, Bernie, there you see the 42nd President of the United States and the soon-to-be 43rd President of the United States. Quite a striking moment. Mr. Bush obviously bears quite a resemblance to his father. This a replay of, in some ways, of the scene we saw 8 years ago when Mr. Clinton came to power. These two men get along quite well in their brief but private conversations, as you have been mentioning, some harsh words during the campaign. Mr. Clinton, though, telling friends in the past week he was very impressed with then Governor Bush, President-elect Bush, when he came calling a few weeks back at the White House. He said he asked some very smart questions about the organization of the White House, about the staff of the White House, about how President Clinton communicated with the American people. President Clinton telling friends he believes that one of the secrets to President-elect Bush's success during the campaign was that he was constantly underestimated by the American people, by the media who covered him, and certainly we know from his private comments to friends, President Clinton believes the Vice President, Al Gore, also seriously underestimated the man who in less than an hour from now will become the 43rd President of the United States.
John, doesn't Mr. Bush plan to strike some of the executive orders that President Clinton signed in these closing days of his administration?
He certainly does, Bernie. A little music playing up behind me. I don't know if our viewers can hear me quite well. That will be one of the challenges President Clinton faces. He says he wants to relatively disappear for about 2 months, keep a very low profile, but he says he'll also have to restrain himself if he sees President Bush reversing some of those late-term decisions by President Clinton. President Clinton hoping other Democrats will step up and protest if that happens, but it will be interesting to see if he can keep his promise to himself to keep a low profile for a month or two.
John, I know a lot of people might be speculating on what the outgoing and incoming president might be chatting about. I know one thing through our Larry King. At that ceremony Thursday that Larry King hosted, George Bush said to him, after it was all over, the pageantry, he said, "What do you think of the Texas Rangers? They paid $250 million for Alex Rodriguez, and they still don't have a pitcher." Given Mr. Clinton's baseball attraction, you might think they might be talking about prospects for 2001 in the American League.
Well, they very well may. This is a time, perhaps, for small talk, although someone was saying that the president might use just these final moments to talk about something serious that is coming up on the next president's platter, whether it's an international or a domestic issue that maybe the rest of us haven't even begun to think about yet.
Well, that would be in keeping with what the president said during his time of travail a couple of years ago. He said he intended to hold power to the last hour of the last day.
And speaking of which, this transfer, as majestic as it is an abrupt transfer. At 12 o'clock sharp, the power shifts from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush. Make no mistakes about it. There's one story that I think underlines that very well. In 1981, when Jimmy Carter was leaving office, he had spent 3 days straight working on getting those hostages out of Iran, the American hostages. Hamilton Jordan had been there as his chief of staff, working just as hard on it. He had been in the Situation Room. After the new president was inaugurated at noon, he called the White House Situation Room at 1 o'clock to see the status of the hostages. He was told very politely, "I'm sorry, Mr. Jordan, we can't talk to you anymore." That's how fast it changes.
And also on Capitol Hill, we probably won't see the picture, but the military aide carrying in a leather briefcase the nuclear codes that briefcase will be passed on to the military aid of President Bush as soon as he lowers his hand from having taken the oath of office. Jeff, you had mentioned Truman and Eisenhower. They virtually did not utter a word between them when they went up to the Hill.
You could have frozen meat for a year based on the chill that was in that car. But fortunately, that's is the exception rather than the rule. I think both Judy and I, and perhaps you, Bernie, have been outdoors on looking out at the inaugural platform. What always strikes me at these inaugurals is at least in most years, the cheerfulness of it. You see bitter political enemies going up to each other and shaking hands, slapping each other on the back. And I honestly think at that one moment, there really is a sense that, as I think it was Tip O'Neill once said, that we're all friends after 5 o'clock in the evening.
But Jeff, you also know politics is theater. I mean,
yes.
A lot of it is theater. The motorcade makes its way from the White House of Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol. As it does, we'll take a break. We'll be back as it arrives at the United States Capitol.
The last time you saw the world and felt that it, for once, revolved around you? When was the last time you watched an eagle fish for salmon, rode a Gladstone train, or saw a bear from your balcony? And when was the last time you witnessed Mother Nature recreating herself? Holland, America, it's time.
Let's make the driving experience more enjoyable.
We'll rent Jaguars, town cars.
And the Grand Marquis for $49.
Oh, the cars will have leather seats, a CD player.
And aromatherapy candles.
We don't really need aromatherapy candles. Maybe not the candles, but the enjoyable thing is good, you know?
Dear Clarice, are you back on the case? If so, goody goody. Because I need some action, Clarice. I need to come out of retirement and return to public life. Regards, your old pal, Hannibal Lecter.
Rated R. Starts February 9th.
The motorcade carrying President Bill Clinton and soon-to-be President George Walker Bush to the United States Capitol, where in about 45 minutes the ceremony will take place. Let's go there to the inside of that building, to the rotunda, to our own Jean Meserve.
Judy, you may recall that when Senator Joe Lieberman was picked as Al Gore's running mate, there was some debate over whether he would come to an inauguration on the Sabbath. Well, he has come to an inauguration on the Jewish Sabbath, but of course it is not his own. It is George W. Bush. We spoke to him just a moment ago as he walked past us. He reflected a little bit on his run for the vice presidency, saying it was an extraordinary opportunity. He was proud that they had broken a barrier, but he said this was a moment to come together, and he wished the best to the president and the president-elect. Senator Lieberman, just one of a stream of dignitaries who've gone past us here today. We've seen Republican governors, including, I might say, Florida Governor Jeb Bush. We've seen members of Congress come by, and we've also seen members of the cabinet and some people who will play key roles in the Bush White House. One of them, Karl Rove. He, of course, one of the top strategists for the Bush campaign. He will be a key player in the Bush White House. He came into this very impressive Capitol Rotunda, took one look up and said, well, it's not as big as the Texas Capitol Rotunda. A lot of Texas pride here today. Judy, Bernie, back to you.
You know, we just saw former President Jimmy Carter there, and I'm wondering, trying to imagine what's going through his mind and remembering when he had to turn over power, and as you were mentioning, the American hostages were being released. That was a very hectic inaugural day.
Indeed. In fact, I think of all the inaugurals that I've ever seen, that was the most auspicious beginning a new president could have. I mean, here you have, I believe, in fact, that the clouds parted about noon when Reagan was being sworn in, and as he went to that lunch in the Capitol, we got the news that the hostages were being released. So at the same moment, we see this new president come in, the Americans being freed. Reagan was able to announce that at the luncheon, and if you remember the old Joe DiMaggio line, I'd rather be lucky than good, you couldn't have a presidency beginning on a more upbeat note than that one.
Now, every former president is invited to these inaugurals. Of course, it's not necessarily the case that they're here. Bernie, you said you've seen Jimmy Carter. Have we seen Gerald Ford? We assume Ronald Reagan, of course, will not be here. Candy Crowley, you are there. You can give us a much closer eye. Candy?
Well, I remember that day for CNN. It was a very hectic day when Mr. Carter was leaving office. The hostages were being released. We had a split screen. We had correspondents over there covering them and covering the inauguration at the same time. Bill Schneider, there was a lot going on.
That's right. Right up until the last minute. What I'm reminded of is Bill Clinton's statement that you recall Dick Cheney actually made fun of in his acceptance speech at the Republican convention. Clinton said, "I'm going to work until the last hour of the last day of my administration." And he obviously has. It was his way of laying down a challenge to the Republicans. You're trying to remove me from office, but I'm going to be there until the last minute working. And he's even been issuing regulations at the last minute, which are going to be printed in a hurry in the Federal Register on environmental protection, on consumer protection, things that some Republicans don't like.
And issuing some pardons to people he is close to, people who were involved in the so-called Whitewater affair, Susan McDougal, Webb Hubbell, his good friend, the financier Mike Milken.
No,
we know that Susan McDougal was pardoned. We know that Roger Clinton was pardoned.
The decision was made not to pardon Mike Milken.
We know, and it's interesting who wasn't pardoned, including the imprisoned spy Jonathan Pollard, in prison for spying for Israel. A lot of pressure on both Bill Clinton and Senator Clinton during her campaign. The CIA director, George Tenet, who's been asked to stay on, is known to have said, if he pardons Pollard, I'm out, I will resign in protest, and the president didn't.
We know a little bit about the speech that we're going to hear, the inaugural address. They have not released it in full, as far as I know. But there is a clear reference in there. We've been given a couple of excerpts to character. And there are all sorts of things that one can read into that bill.
Well, it's interesting that if there was any single issue that got George W. Bush elected president, it was the issue of character. This is an unusual inauguration because, you know, what Clinton created in the country was a consensus on policy, but the country is divided on values. You could see it in the map of the election results, the heartland versus the more liberal coasts. There were big differences by lifestyle. Those who were religious voted heavily for Bush. Those who were not regular churchgoers for Gore. Gun owners heavily for Bush. Non-gun owners for Gore. Lifestyle had a lot to do with this choice. Well, that's because the country was deeply divided on values, but not on policy. It's unusual because Americans right now tell us that they're very satisfied with the way things are going in the country. Yet they've not only got a new president, but they've got a new party coming to power. I think what Americans voted for was not radically different policies, as they did, say, when Ronald Reagan came to power, but a president who would provide better character and more moral leadership. That's the new thing they're looking for in George Bush, and he's going to point to that in his inaugural speech.
And in fact, the one of the few excerpts we've seen, the one hint of a policy issue, is where he calls on citizens to, it's kind of Kennedy-esque. He says, I ask you to seek a common good beyond your comfort, and listen to this line, to defend needed reforms against easy attacks. It's the one situation where he seems to be saying, don't listen to the Democrats who tell you that we can't reform education or Social Security.
And maybe a reference to tax cuts as well.
Oh, yes,
One
exactly.
could define that as a reform.
And a little tiny bit of ideology may be sneaking in, because what the president will say when he takes office is, what you do, speaking to his fellow Americans, is as important as anything government does. It's a way of saying citizenship, which is going to be a theme of his inaugural remarks. Citizenship is just as important as government activism. That's a line that's going to go over well with Republicans.
That sounds a little like ask not what your country can do for you, though, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, but those were very different days for the Democrats.
The presidential limousine has arrived on the east side of the Capitol. Security people now just standing and waiting to get everything in order before they open the doors, and these two leaders step out and file into the Capitol.
It may be a little bit early. We had been told this was going to take place around 11:30, but you know, what is it, a mile, 1.65 miles between the White House and the Capitol, and they were driving about as slowly as I think anybody could drive.
Well, efficiency has been a kind of hallmark of this hurried transition. Bush got his cabinet named in record time. It looks like they're headed for confirmation very quickly. I think this Republican administration prides itself on efficiency and the fact that they are going to hit the ground running, and they've got a lot of people who know how things work in Washington.
The two senators, you see Senator Chris Dodd, Senator Mitch McConnell, these are the co-chairs of the Congressional Inaugural Committee. This is pretty much a formal thing. These are senators who are named to officially be in charge of the inauguration, although frankly it's the Bush people who've run this thing. Whatever they want goes today, insofar as what the Constitution calls for.
That's right.
And if I'm not mistaken, they're now passing through the Capitol. You guys have spent a lot of your lives working there. I think they are passing, is it through Statuary Hall, where some of the great legislators of the past have been immortalized?
Frank Sesno is outdoors, but he's got a good view, Frank, don't you, of the place where all the ceremony is going to take place?
Yes, Judy, a good view and a good feel for things out here. The West Front here featuring American government virtually in its totality. The United States Supreme Court is here, the House of Representatives, the United States Senate. By the way, we've seen several senators walking here without overcoats. Senator Durbin, Senator Feingold, a few others just in their jackets. A number of, as you can see looking out here, these plastic raincoats have been passed out. It's 31 degrees out here right now. We do have former President Carter. I see James Baker up there. He's standing next to Colin Powell, who was sort of jumping around and looking very nearly jubilant just a few moments ago as he was acknowledging some friends across the way. So there's a great sense of expectation. We're expecting President Bush, former President Bush, the president-elect's father, to be introduced momentarily. Most of the Bush family already here. Marvin, Jeb Bush, the governor of Florida, already in place. Jeb Bush, I see, by the way, has one of these disposable cameras, and he's clicking away for posterity. One would have thought he might have had a more substantial device with him, but perhaps he grabbed it on the way out.
We're all looking at the crowds there at the Capitol. I think it's fair to say every space is taken in that immediate area that they've created there on the west front of the Capitol. And I would say, just looking behind us, because we're stationed across the street on top of the Labor Department building, the crowds are strong, but not as strong as some inaugurals that we've seen, and I think that clearly the weather had something to do with that. We've been hearing about bad weather for days, and I think a lot of people may be staying away because they didn't want to put up with it.
Mm-hmm. This is also the west front of the Capitol. This is one of the changes that Ronald Reagan brought to Washington. Historically, inaugurals took place, most of them, if not all of them, on the east front. It was Reagan's intention to face west for a couple of reasons. First, he was a Californian. Second, he wanted to look not east across the Atlantic, but symbolically west across the country. And third, the change of direction was meant to symbolize the change that Ronald Reagan wanted to bring to Washington. Every one of his successors has chosen to keep the inaugural on the west front. I think it's a more dramatic visage, and it makes better pictures for us television folks. You can get the Washington Monument behind us and the Lincoln Memorial, and I think it accommodates the crowds better.
It is a much more dramatic picture. I remember the one inauguration I remember seeing up close was the Jimmy Carter inaugural in 1976, the last one, as you point out, that was on the East Front. And it was a beautiful and important ceremony, but this, you're right, Jeff, the building, the way they can, the look at the flags, the way they've displayed them there hanging.
This faces the National Mall, and it also faces the White House. The White House is west of the Capitol building, so in a way it's more of a symbolic connection between the two branches of government. The East Front faces the Supreme Court, and that's a special consideration in this election.
It also happened that it was an accommodation for Reagan's own speech. Reagan's inaugural in '81 made reference to these monuments. And it was much easier for the television networks to dramatize the speech by cutting all these monuments Reagan was facing. So we'll be on this West Front for a while, I suspect.
And we just saw former President George Bush and Barbara Bush. We're minutes away from the inaugural program for the swearing-in ceremony. When we come back, we'll take you to it live. Please stay with us.
Sunday on CNN's Late Edition, the new White House Chief of Staff, Andrew Card, plus a look ahead to the first 100 days. Sunday, noon Eastern on CNN.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On the left side of the aircraft is the Grand Canyon. On the right is Lake Powell. And back in seat 19E is George Johnson, who spent way too much money for his family's tickets. Idiot. Loser. To spare your family any further embarrassment, we'll be assisting you with the deplaning process immediately. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Next time, George, save money on travel. Use Hotwire. A great trip starts with a great deal.
The Blazers take on the Chicago Bulls Tuesday, January 23rd at 5, right here on AT&T Cable.
Wolf Blitzer reports the day's top stories, weeknights, 8 Eastern on CNN.
If the value of your home has risen during the last couple of years, now may be a great time to refinance and cash out some of your equity. Just log on to ditech.com or call us at 1-800-71-FIXED. Today's low fixed rate is only 6.990%, APR 7.158% with 0 points. And there are no upfront fees. It's smart money from ditech.com. Apply online or call us now at 1-800-71-FIXED.
This is not a photo, it's a digital image. And this is not a photo, it's a computer image. It's not a photo until you print it on jet.
Grand dais with the new president who serves in the United States Congress knows what the backdrop is for the politics that are to come. A 50-50 Senate, a House that is nearly evenly divided as well. The Republicans have a mere 5-seat edge there, and an election itself that took 36 days to settle. I was talking with one prominent Republican yesterday, Bernie, who said that for it all, there's a certain hopefulness here that they can actually accomplish something. Nothing so focuses the mind, he said, as self-preservation. He says that Democrats and Republicans alike are going to want to find some things amidst the debate that they can settle and accomplish. Bernie?
Thank you, Frank Sesno.
In order for people to come and listen to this speech, ordinary people, that is, they had to get through one of 16 different checkpoints. Unprecedented to have so much security today. Leon Harris is down there talking with some of the people who made it through.
Yes, Judy, these folks down here have run through that gauntlet of security and have stood here for at least a good 3-4 hours in what looks like about 6 inches of mud, and they did not budge an inch. Now, moments ago, you were observing that there weren't very many applause lines in the speech we just heard, but this lady I've been speaking with off and on all morning has said to me just a moment ago that you thought this was the best one you've heard, and you've heard other inauguration speeches.
And I think that this is the best inaugural speech that I have heard. He was very concise. Short, sweet, but concise, and he had his plan out and without demagoguing anything. I thought it was very good.
Was there anything in particular, any particular theme that you heard that struck you?
Yeah, I like the whole idea of unity. I think that under the circumstances, we really needed that in this country. Unity, that's what America's about. One nation under God, unity. We're one nation.
And that's about the same observation I heard you making a
God
while
and
ago.
country. You know, I have two sons in the military. My daughter married into the military. So I'm a military mother, Navy mother. And I'm so happy. I want him to do something for the boys and the next generation and the poor for God and country. He's got to.
All right, well,
Thank you, dear.
there you have it. And again, as I said, as these people here depart, you might get a chance to see later on. I'm serious. It's been like this ever since the whole event got underway this morning. Lots of spirits are high here, and there's been no let-up whatsoever, Judy.
All right, from Leon, let's go to the White House. John King, are you with us?
I believe so this time, Judy. I guess my observation would be now comes the hard part. As Jeff Greenfield was saying a bit earlier, he touched briefly, President Bush, he is now, touched briefly on his major themes: reforming education, reforming Social Security and Medicare, cutting taxes, won some applause there. Those, of course, the priorities he ran on in the campaign. But as Frank mentioned, a 50-50 Congress, a very difficult environment. President Clinton promised in both inaugural addresses he would deal with the structural problems of Social Security and Medicare, the aging baby boom generation. Despite the booming economy, the now record federal surpluses, that was not done because of the sharp partisan divides on those issues in Congress. President Bush's education agenda also faces opposition among the Democrats. So some celebration today, and then it will be quickly down to business. And one thing we know, this new president studied very closely the early days of the Clinton administration, when there was chaos, a flurry of policy initiatives, a debate over gays in the military. They plan on going very deliberately, education and taxes first. They want to get something done, and they're already trying to reframe the debate, saying, don't judge us in 100 days. We should be judged in 180 days. It will take that much time to get going. One of the big challenges now as well, filling out the second and third tier jobs of an administration. He filled the cabinet in record time, but they are not moving as quickly, filling the key policy jobs in all of those very important departments.
Music from the United States Marine Corps Band on the west side of the Capitol as we await the departure of former President, and Mrs. Clinton.
Before the time for this speech passes and we get on to what John King was talking about, the serious business, let's just pick up on a couple of things that Candy was pointing to, the feeling on part of the Bush team that they wanted to talk about, and to the people who hadn't voted for him. One of the most striking lines in this whole speech, it's biblical in its formulation. When we see that wounded traveler on the road to Jericho, we will not pass to the other side, which is a way of saying leave no child behind, but in a much more elevated way. And he keeps talking about the fact in the speech that it's not acceptable to have this kind of poverty. He talks about people who feel cynical that they are not part of this country. And I thought, once again, you know, those are striking themes for a self-described conservative, but the compassion and the compassionate conservatism was very much here as we see the departure.
And another line, Jeff, all of us are diminished when any are hopeless.
There's Alan Tipper Gore.
Yes.
And
saying goodbye to Vice President and Mrs. Cheney.
That's right. This has to be poignant for the two of them because, what was it, just how many days ago, a month and a week ago, the Supreme Court ruled that the recount would not go on, that the vote count was final.
And
that was it.
And across the street from where that limousine is leaving is the Supreme Court of the United States.
That's right. The Supreme Court played a political role in this election that it has never played in the past and became a matter of intense controversy, which means that any Supreme Court appointment that Bush is able to make as president is going to be unusually sensitive.
This is a man, Dick Cheney, who knows a great deal about the White House. As we know, he was chief of staff to President Gerald Ford when, he was just 30 years old, 34 years old?
34.
Remarkably young to hold a job at the center of power.
He is regarded
at that age.
He is regarded now as, by many people, as the person who really is
the prime minister.
The prime minister in this government. Bush himself has never worked in Washington except by association with his father, but he's surrounded by people who know Washington. Not just Dick Cheney, but Andrew Card, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul O'Neill. They've all worked in Washington.
I was talking with some Republicans. Here we see the new president and the old president. leaving the Capitol. I was talking to some Republicans last evening, and we were talking about, it's clearly Mr. Bush, President Bush, has put together a strong foreign policy team, and I said, who do you think is going to be the leader when it comes to domestic policy? And without skipping a beat, the fellow I was talking to said Cheney. Look to Cheney. He's going to be calling the shots.
You mentioned the old president. We should mention that except for Theodore Roosevelt, this President Clinton at 54 will be the youngest ex-president we have ever had. At this point in his life, Ronald Reagan had not yet been elected governor of California. And here is Bill Clinton leaving after 8 years as president with and I think as much as people wonder what George W. Bush is going to do, this is such a compelling personality, whatever you think of him. There are a lot of people now saying, so now what?
Well, he's going to be in Washington at least part of the time. For one thing, he and his wife have a home in Washington. He's going to have an office in Washington across the street from the White House. He's entitled to have one. He is not known for being reluctant to speak out on important public issues. He defended his legacy the other night. In a way, he may play the role eventually of, I would say, kibitzer-in-chief to the new administration.
And I believe he is heading to Andrews, Judy, not in a helicopter.
Is that it looks like it. At one point,
weather.
the plan was to take the helicopter to Andrews Air Force Base, and somebody was joking, well, they could circle Washington and come right back here, because as Bill said, they have a house here, but instead they are going to go to, I think it's the Westchester County Airport, which is near Chappaqua.
White Plains, where the Chappaqua home. I mean, given the weather, he might just drive a couple of blocks to Union Station and jump a train. Harry Truman took a train all the way back to Independence, Missouri.
It is the weather that is causing President Clinton and Senator Clinton to head out to Andrews in a car, and not in the waiting helicopter, we're told.
Yes.
And the Bushes are getting back inside smartly because it's cold outside, it's damp, it's misty.
We all
lunch
remember.
is waiting.
We remember the end of Reagan's administration, that wonderful wave he gave when he got on the helicopter and went off to California.
This has to be, I don't know, we can all come up with our own words for it. He came into office having beaten George Bush.
Yes.
And 8 years later, successful first two-term successful Democratic president since
FDR.
Franklin Roosevelt, 4 terms. And he leaves to another George Bush.
That's right. And there's an enormous irony. You know, all the indicators suggested with a booming economy, peace in the world, that Al Gore should have won this election easily. But clearly Clinton's personal problems spoiled it for his successor. And Americans were voting for a different style, a better character of leadership. And that's one of the reasons why the election was so very, very close. Americans didn't want a dramatic change of policy the way they did when Reagan got elected or when Clinton got elected. They did want a better character of leaders.
One quick observation about the new president. In Philadelphia in July, or August, I guess, when he gave his acceptance speech, a lot of people commented that he seemed a little bit nervous. He was trying so hard not to smile or, to use the stereotype, smirk. He seemed almost tense. I thought today he looked much more relaxed. He was wearing the mantle of power, at least in terms of his own projection, pretty comfortably. This is a guy, his friends tell me, who never takes himself for the moment all that seriously. Just before he went to the platform, he turned and said something light to one of the people behind him, and you wonder whether or not it's sinking in that, okay, I've got it now.
Well, he's a big teaser. He likes to joke, and he likes to give people he likes pet names.
Yeah.
I think he took his father's loss very hard, though. I mean, he does, you're right, there is a light demeanor there. He does like to joke, but there are parts of his life that have been very, very serious and very tough for him. The story's been told about the weekend when he and his wife went to Colorado with some friends, and he decided after that weekend to give up drinking. There are other moments in his life that have been well chronicled by now, but at this stage of his life, the focus has to be on the agenda that he's laid out in the campaign.
Yeah,
and I just want to say, if by chance you're just turning on CNN, wherever you're watching in the world, the United States has a new president and a new vice president.
George Bush, one of the main features that people like about George Bush is that he has a quality of niceness, openness, expansiveness, tolerance. You know, too many conservatives have a problem that they come across as harsh, judgmental, mean. That was the problem at the 1992 Houston Convention. Bush has a very different face, in some ways like that of Ronald Reagan. And when I was listening to the speech before, it occurred to me, even though he laid out his agenda and talked about tax cuts, A Democrat would not have been uncomfortable giving that speech.
No,
there was
that's
very little in there that a Democrat would have seriously objected.
It was not a Ronald Reagan speech. I kept thinking that over and over.
No, in 1981, Ronald Reagan came in with a clear mandate, and he attacked excessive taxation, the excessive federal government, promised to rein it in. That was a speech in which Ronald Reagan was saying, you gave me the mandate, we are changing directions of the country. This is like, in this sense, like most inaugurals, and as Candy Crowley reminded us, trying to strike conciliatory themes to those who didn't vote for him. It did not mention the circumstances of the election, unlike John Quincy Adams' inaugural address of 1825. Probably
in fact,
a wise
he
choice.
Complimented Al Gore.
Yes.
He said, you ran a spirited campaign and you ended gracefully.
Well, that's right. He not only thanked the former president, which every president has done since Carter, he actually thanked his opponent at the same, in the same breath. So. But as John King reminded us, it always reminds me of the last line of that great picture of the candidate, where the guy's just won, Robert Redford just won a Senate seat, and he turns to his aide and he says, what do I do now? Now, George W. Bush knows what he wants to do now. I think the question for the new president is, how do I do it now?
We just saw the honor guard going back into the Capitol after the Clintons left, and also inside the Capitol. In the rotunda is Gene Reserve.
That's right, Bernie. All of the principals filed past us here on their way back in from the Capitol grounds. We asked each of them how they felt, and here's what they had to say. President Bush said he felt humbled and honored. President Clinton said he felt great. Vice President Gore said, I feel fine. When asked what he thought of the speech, he said, I thought it was good. And George Herbert Walker Bush, the former president, came by too. He said it's a great day, our family, and he graded his son as giving an A on that speech. Very pleased. With me now is Governor John Engler, who worked very hard for the candidate, George W. Bush. You're the incoming head of the National Governors Association. What's this administration going to mean for the governors of this country?
Well, I think this is going to be an administration that's going to be very state and local government friendly. And I think one of the great challenges that President Bush now faces is to work with the Congress and the state and local officials to return power and authority back to the states and those communities. And we've shown with welfare reform what a positive difference it can make. And I think whether it's education, which is going to come right out of the box, there's a lot of work that we can do. And today it was interesting in talking about citizenship and really challenging all of America to accept personal responsibility for their own actions. He did point out that a child in a failing school has got a serious problem, and we can't sit idly by.
And what do you think about the likelihood of bipartisanship here in the the nation's capital, especially given the hearings that we've heard this week over, for instance, John Ashcroft, Gail Norton?
Well, I think the president made it very clear in his speech today. He's made it clear throughout the campaign, really, but he affirmed it so beautifully today. His hand is going to be reaching out. And I think the American people are going to understand that, and they're going to be watching to see if other hands are going to reach out to him. I mean, he can't both extend his hand, then reach out to take his own hand. Somebody else has got to do that. And I think there are men and women of goodwill in both parties here in the Congress who want to work with this new administration.
And the speech, what did you think?
Oh, it was a terrific speech, and I thought it was the right tone.
Sounded like a Democrat, though.
No, I think it sounded like an American. I thought it was a great primer on American democracy and the responsibility of a citizen, the common good he made reference to. And I do think that a civil society, very important.
Governor, I have to cut you off. Back to the studio.
We are watching President George Bush, and we're told Dick Cheney is there nearby, signing documents, nominating the officers of the cabinet.
We see Dennis Hastert over his left shoulder. Behind him, Strom Thurmond, 98 years old, President pro temp of the Senate. We see Majority Leader Lott and Chris Dodd to Hastert's left, the co-chair of the inaugural ceremonies.
You could say this is the first official act for the new president.
Yes, indeed. Should also remind people that when Strom Thurmond came to the United States Senate, Dwight Eisenhower was president. The schools were still segregated in the South, and television was the new kid on the block.
Strom it was black and white. It was black and
for president in 1948. That was over half a century ago. He was running for president as a states' rights candidate. He has outlasted them all.
He is nominating now, officially signing the nominations for his cabinet officers, and some of them will actually be voted on, and we have every reason to believe will be confirmed by the Senate this afternoon.
That's right.
Colin Powell,
yes.
I think Paul O'Neill, if I'm not mistaken, Don Rumsfeld.
Yes.
This is the first right-handed president, by the way, in a while. I know that both George Bush and Bill Clinton were left-handed. I don't know if there's a significance politically in that, but it's Inauguration Day and everything counts.
Frank Sesno. Frank Sesno has some word for us on Senate nominations. Frank, you're still outside on the West Front?
I'm still outside on the West Front, Bernie, and it's still 31 degrees and still drizzling. They don't linger long here in Washington, as you can see here, as George W. Bush signs and, as you say, engages in his first official acts. What we're told is shortly, as Judy mentioned, we will have some confirmations. We will have a new Secretary of Defense and a new Secretary of State and other members of the cabinet as the first confirmations take place this afternoon. I'm told by a leading Republican that Senator Pat Leahy, who's been chairing the Judiciary Committee overseeing the hearings of John Ashcroft, has indicated his confidence that John Ashcroft, that confirmation vote, will take place next week. That clearly the most controversial to date. We know that the new president will bring his education package, or the first elements of it, before the Congress next week. We know that he'll be sitting down with John McCain, and negotiations are going on behind the scenes, Bernie, between John McCain and Trent Lott and others to bring McCain's campaign finance reform bill to the Congress very quickly. Maybe not as quickly as McCain would like. April date is what we're now hearing. He'd wanted it sooner than that. But campaign finance reform, trying to do something to stem the flood of money into politics, is something near and dear to McCain, something many Republicans have resisted in the past because they felt it's too sweeping. There is a certain sense here that some basic core is going to be the subject of a very intensive search. And, of course, as John King mentioned earlier, President Bush's tax cut plan. He plans to put the whole thing, $1.6 trillion over 10 years, before the United States Congress. Many Republicans included say that's more than the Congress is going to digest. Elements of it will be easy to pass. Marriage penalty, ending that. Some of the elements to liberalize deductions for your 401k, your IRA, that sort of thing. But they're going to start with the whole thing. Earlier, Bush said he would unabashedly and unashamedly making a tax cut, a big one, a cornerstone both of his campaign and the first months of his presidency. Bernie?
Also, Frank, Jonathan Karl, a couple days ago in Inside Politics, reported that Monday night, John McCain will be at the White House to meet with President Bush.
It's Wednesday. Is it Wednesday night?
Yeah.
Wednesday night.
Wednesday night.
Thank you. Next week.
Next week.
Well,
soon.
Well, Karl said Monday night.
Okay.
And Wednesday would be brought up on the floor of the Senate.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting there is McCain, almost as much as Bush, believes he comes out of this election campaign with a mandate as well, having won New Hampshire and acquired a constituency. He's determined to press his own agenda, almost as if he had won a mandate.
I'm struck by how specific the schedule already is. There was an article in one of the papers this morning laying out what he's doing every day next week, in the day and the evening. I mean, he really wants to get the sense of momentum first few days in office.
I believe he's a big believer in efficiency, the business model, and his transition was surprisingly, amazingly, really efficient considering the circumstances.
Jean Meserve has a guest in the rotunda.
I do. I am here with Karl Rove, who is senior advisor to the president now. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Education, the first order of business. Big piece of business to take up right off the bat. Why that approach rather than taking some smaller, simple stuff?
Well, he said it was his #1 priority during the campaign, and what he said during the campaign he meant. And we'll send the president's education package up to the Hill this week.
Talk to me a little bit about the spirit here on the Hill. We've seen some very contentious hearings in this past week, particularly over the John Ashcroft nomination. What impact is all of that going to have?
Well, I don't think it'll have much. I mean, I think John Ashcroft answered the questions that have been raised. There'll be, I believe, all cabinet nominees will be confirmed. But I will tell you what the public hasn't seen is behind the scenes. Our education package, we've been talking to a lot of Republicans and Democrats about it. The bipartisan group of 19 members came to Texas just shortly before Christmas to talk about the president's education package. And I think you're going to see a lot of that, where Democrats and Republicans are coming together to work for the president's agenda.
And the Democrats are coming to the White House, I believe, on Wednesday to meet with President Bush. What's the agenda?
There'll be some Democrats there tomorrow, too.
And what's the agenda? Is he listening to them or is he talking to them?
Well, President hopes to have regular meetings with the leadership of the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats together, and this would be a good opportunity to establish relationships and open dialogues and listen, yes.
Talk to me about this speech. What was the object? What was the intent? What was he trying to get across to the American people?
Well, I was trying to share with the American people the principles by which he will lead as president, that he will be committed to this vision that no child should be left behind, that everybody in America is worthy of dignity and respect and opportunity, and that he will be informed by the principles that he laid out in the speech.
Carl Rove, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Bernie, Judy, back to you.
Thanks very much. Candy Crowley, why is next week symbolically so important to this new administration?
Very important to them because they believe that President Bush needs to be seen as moving ahead, as dynamic, and is beginning to get things done. Back to what you were talking about earlier, and that is the split in the Senate. There was a lot of talk, as you recall, during December and late November about, boy, it's going to be so tough no matter who wins this. I mean, and the Congress is divided. They believe they can get things done, and they believe it's important to come out of the box very early. It's why they have such a busy schedule. I was talking to some of the cabinet members and a staffer, or soon-to-be cabinet members and staffers, saying, so, you know, tomorrow do you get to celebrate? No, we've got a meeting in the afternoon. So they think it's extremely important that next week he be seen going about the act of governance and beginning to get things done.
There is something interesting about this as a first day of the new administration. Today is the first time since 1954 that Republicans control the Senate by one vote, the Vice President, the House of Representatives by a slim margin, and the White House. The Republicans control all three of the political branches of government. That hasn't happened in over 45 years. So some Republicans, like members of the House, are saying this is a real mandate to implement a conservative agenda, but others know that those margins are very slim.
And the last time that was the case, it wasn't so close in the Senate
and
the House.
That's right. That's when Eisenhower came in 1952. He brought in the Republican House and the Republican Senate, and that hasn't happened since then until today. The question is, how much of a mandate does that amount to?
We should point out, I guess, that as of about 52 minutes ago, with Dick Cheney swearing in, all the Democrats who chaired the committees in the Senate for the last 18 days now become ranking minority members, and those Republicans take back the chairs that they knew they were going to have because of the outcome of this election. Everything about November was unusual, and that's just one of them.
We're going to show you some pictures now of some things that have been going on. This is at 3rd and C Streets, Northwest, is that right, in Washington?
That's right down where we are.
These are live pictures, very close.
Right below us. We're on the roof of the Labor Department. These pictures are right down in the street. And we can tell you, thousands of people are in the streets right now. And this is videotape of a confrontation earlier today. This is at 15th and L Streets. About a couple blocks away from here, the police chief of the District of Columbia, Charles Ramsey, actually made an arrest. Several people have been arrested so far. The city is very peaceful, generally speaking. This is videotape.
And I don't think, maybe because of the weather, the expectations of 50 to 75,000 demonstrators, if they're here, they're sure keeping a low profile, because we've seen a relatively smaller number than that.
And what's happening in the streets right now, by the thousands, people are streaming away from the west front of the Capitol, and many of them are going to the positions along the parade route. We're now back to live picture. Some 40,000 bleacher seats, ranging in price from $15 to $100. And if you paid $100 for a seat, you'd be inclined to go take it.
During those protests a little bit earlier, we're reading this report. That's right.
That's an excellent point, Bernie.
Yes, but you can stand for free.
Oh, this just if you remember the Watergate scandal and you remember the famous federal court, the camera just passed it. We're in the Labor Department, and right across the street west from us is the famous federal court where Judge John Zirica and others presided during the Watergate scandal.
And there have even been some members of the just departing administration who spent some time in that
more than a couple
courthouse.
Yes, they know the marble floors very well.
Senator Clinton herself was there at one point to testify before a grand jury.
It seems to me that one thing that the Bush administration is determined to do is avoid some of the mistakes that President Clinton made when he first took office, which was to overinterpret his mandate, to come in with a lot of people who did not know how Washington worked. This administration, the Bush administration, is being very careful in the next week. A lot of meetings planned with key members of Congress. Now, of course, the Republicans are in control of Congress. The Democrats controlled Congress when Clinton came in. Nevertheless, they appeared, they had a certain distance from the Congress.
Standoffish.
Yeah, it was a standoffish quality. The Bush administration, when you look at their schedule for the next week, they are being very open. The president is meeting with the Speaker of the House. He's meeting with the Senate Majority Leader as of today, Trent Lott. They're being very conciliatory because they know that the Congress holds equal power to the president when it comes to legislation.
And it is getting started right now as we speak with a luncheon in the Capitol with the key participants today. They're waiting, we're told, for the new president to join them, but you can see his father standing there talking with the Chief Justice.
Very interesting picture. 5 to 4.
Yes.
5 to 4, and this man was one of the 5.
That's right. And of course, could be a lot of controversy over Bush's Supreme Court nominations. If Justice Rehnquist retires while Bush is president, a lot of people expect Bush might want to name another sitting justice, Associate Justice Scalia, to that seat, but that could prove to be intensely controversial because Scalia, one of the most conservative members of the court, was an architect of the decision that made Bush president. And a lot of people would say, wait a minute, that looks too much like a political payoff. Scalia made Bush president, Bush makes him Chief Justice. That would be tough to bring off.
On a less combative note, I do want to point out this is a relatively recent tradition. This post-inaugural lunch in Statuary Hall was inaugurated, you should pardon the pun, 20 years ago when Ronald Reagan did it. It was from this lunch that Ronald Reagan got up and announced that the American hostages were flying home to eventually to the United States, which, as I mentioned earlier, had to have been the best stroke of luck or timing any newly inaugurated president has ever had.
I'm wondering, is Spiro Agnew's statue still there? Well, I don't know. Gene Meserve, you're in the rotunda.
And I've never aspired to be Martha Stewart, but here's my opportunity to do it. Let me tell you a little bit about this luncheon they're going to attend. There are 22 tables there, 10 people at each table, a head table that seats 12. At that head table, they will be using the china that was used by Thomas Jefferson at his inauguration in 1801. That is 200 years ago. The guests will be eating off replicas of that china. I am told that they will be eating lobster pie, grenadine of beef, and a sticky nut meat pudding with vanilla bean ice cream to top it all off. And we're told that there will be gifts presented inside. There are etched bowls with pictures of the Capitol. One will be given to President Bush, one to Vice President Cheney, and a third bowl, a smaller one, will be given to the former President George Herbert Walker Bush. Also, they will be given flags by Dennis Hastert. These were flags that were hoisted at dawn over the House and over the Senate. One will go to President Bush, one to Vice President Cheney. The guest list is long, put together by the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies. And at the head table will not only be Mitch McConnell, who is now the chairman of that committee, but also Christopher Dodd, a very ardent Democrat who's the ranking Democrat on that committee. Back to you.
Okay. Gene, I think it's fair to say those dishes will not go in the dishwasher.
I think that's safe to say. Yes, I'm sure they're treated with great care.
I like the sticky nut pudding.
We are going to take a break. When we come back, much more live coverage of today's inaugural events.
Tonight on Larry King Weekend, live on Inauguration Day. For Washington Post, Ben Bradley, journalist Sally Quinn, Jim Gilmore, and others. Tonight, 9 Eastern on CNN.
This is my wife. Pleased to meet you. And this is little Dougie Jr. Dougie Jr.
You're the boss? You must have a big TV.
Well, I have a few.
Do you have a satellite dish or AT&T digital cable?
I have a dish.
Then you can't get local channels unless you pay more.
I can't.
No, and you bought all expensive equipment when you could use the cable you already had.
I did?
Yeah. How'd you get to be boss?
AT&T digital cable. It's smarter.
Oh no, I forgot Valentine's Day!
Don't panic. This year, give her beautiful silk roses that last a lifetime. Forever Roses for only $9.95. Forever Roses are delivered in a florist box filled with a dozen of the finest silk roses and a personalized greeting card, all for just $9.95. Call today and we'll include free rush delivery. Supplies are limited, so to guarantee delivery for Valentine's Day, you must call right now. 1-800-257-5700.
Let's talk car repair.
Well, once you hear why service is so different here at Landmark Ford,
We think you'll be kind of excited.
Landmark has more certified master mechanics and the biggest Ford parts inventory in the entire Northwest.
If you need a rental car, we have more than 150,
And we're open until midnight.
plus Saturdays.
Pretty exciting stuff, huh?
The award-winning Landmark Ford Service Department.
Just off I-5 in Tigard.
Get more.
Spend less.
To relieve the stress and anxiety of her job, Rhonda volunteers as a clown for fundraisers. And to get around, she's looking for the right car for her. vhix.com. Want to custom build your new car? Or test drive it online? vhix.com. Make side-by-side comparisons with similar models. Check out crash test results. Find the right car for you. vhix.com. Roadmap to the automotive world.
This is CNN.
So we're going to come back on Andrews Air Force Base, the motorcade, the car carrying former President Bill Clinton and former First Lady, now Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton. They will be climbing on an airplane and flying to New York.
This may be one of the last trips they will take when they don't have to think about red lights. Those of us who live either in Washington or New York know that any president who comes to town has the capacity to commandeer the streets, to the great annoyance, I must say, of most citizens. I think, I guess starting tomorrow, Bill Clinton may have to actually have his car pull up at a red light, which he hasn't had to do in 8 years. It's got to be a shock.
Now, how long is he going to have someone hold an umbrella for him, do you think? How long will that be the case?
It's interesting that the First Lady does not have to leave Washington. She's a member of the United States Senate, and the senators are all here meeting with the new administration. But this is an important symbolic act. Today, she's playing her role as First Lady, the last day as First Lady, rather than United States Senator. But she'll be back real soon.
This is the Air Force Honor Guard inside a hangar at Andrews Air Force Base for obvious reasons. It's still raining, and you can't see it, but Jeff, Bill, Judy, and I have been sneaking something to eat. The dignitaries in the rotunda, they too are eating.
I think they're eating better.
Well,
you think?
And John King has been waiting for me to shut up and come to him so he can do some reporting on this new administration.
Well, Bernie, as we report on the new administration, we say goodbye to the old administration as well. From President Bush today, now the new president of the United States, the theme of reconciliation. From the outgoing president, this was a president who loved to speak, and as a sign of that, we'll hear from him twice in his first hours as a former president. Bill Clinton will speak at this departure ceremony at Andrews Air Force Base. He is also scheduled to speak at an arrival ceremony at the JFK Airport in New York. Then we are told he'd like to take a couple of months and be quiet. You hear them testing the sound system here. I'm across from the White House where the new president's reviewing stand is for the parade. President Clinton, now former President Clinton, wants to keep quiet for a couple of months. He's writing a book. He plans on giving speeches. He's opening the office of a former president in Manhattan, and he's putting the finishing touches on plans to build a $125 million presidential library in Little Rock, Arkansas. He says he'd like to step back, be quiet, let the new president get going. Indeed, after the speech at the Capitol today, you saw President Clinton shake President Bush's hand and say the words, "Good luck." So he wants to keep a low profile. The question will be, can he? He is a man who loves the political debate. We've seen that the last 8 years. Like him or dislike him, he's a man who's quite persuasive when he does get involved in that debate. And if this new president seeks to reverse Clinton administration policies, I suspect it will be very difficult, very, very difficult for President Clinton to keep quiet. Back to you now.
We're watching two pictures on the screen. In the lower left-hand corner, Dick Cheney, the Vice President of the United States. He's just come into the luncheon. We're still looking at those pictures in the upper right-hand corner from Andrews Air Force Base. I don't think it's typical that the outgoing president makes remarks, not only one set, but two sets of remarks.
I have never heard, I can't recall, Jeff, maybe you can, I've never can recall a outgoing president making any kind of remarks or speech, leaving and going into his destination. That's really remarkable.
No, the great story Harry Truman says is when his train pulled into Independence, there was a big crowd to greet him, and he may have said, "Thank you for being here." And then he says, "I drove to my house, put the suitcases in the attic, and, you know, me and Bess began to set up housekeeping." But we do live in a very different time. Here comes the new president.
Listen to this. This 43rd president is hearing for the first times today, "Hail to the Chief."
For himself.
For himself.
He will hear it many, many more times.
And he'll get tired of hearing it.
You think so, Bernie?
Never.
You think that?
Never.
I don't think they ever get tired of hearing. That's one song they've got to love.
But there's no truth to the rumor that the doorbell in Chappaqua plays "Hail to the Chief."
The woman on the other side of President George W. Bush is Elaine Chao. She's seated there because she happens to be married to Senator Mitch McConnell, who's the co-chair of the Inaugural Committee, but she also happens to be the Labor Secretary nominee. And,
regardless of party, you know, there's nothing like an inaugural day. I think it's one of the grandest occasions for the United States, and I just love all this pomp.
Program consisting of a toast and some
Jean Meserve is there at the rotunda.
Hi, I am here with two men who have become very familiar, if they weren't already, over the past week, Senator Patrick Leahy and Senator Orrin Hatch. I want to make sure I've got it right. Senator Hatch, you're now the chairman of the Judiciary Committee again, correct?
I'm not sure I want it back. I called Orrin and said, do I give you congratulations or condolences? I think it gets a little bit of both. Having been chairman for about a week, I realize what this poor guy puts up with all the time.
Of course, the committee has been considering the nomination of John Ashcroft to be Attorney General. When is there going to be a committee vote?
Well, I'm hopeful to, we sent out a committee notice today, I think, to have it next Wednesday in the committee, and I don't know when it will come up on the floor. I hope that nobody will play any games, and I hope that we can, you know, honestly vote it out of committee on Wednesday.
Hope nobody plays games. I think that was directed at you, Senator Leahy. Members of your party then.
I hope it wasn't directed at me, because I've made absolutely sure that senators play by the rules. We do have Senate rules. Any senator, Republican or Democrat, could ask for a one-week delay. I would urge that there not be a delay in the committee vote if all the paperwork is in. A number of us have submitted questions of the witnesses, all the witnesses, including Senator Ashcroft. He told me today everything is, he's getting questions on, he's trying to get in as quickly as he can. I don't want any procedural thing on this. Every senator is going to have to search his or her own soul, how they're going to vote. It's going to be difficult. We all know John Ashcroft. We all like John Ashcroft. Some will vote against him on policy issues, some for him, but it shouldn't be done through any kind of parliamentary procedures. It should be an honest debate, an honest vote, and I think that's what we'll have.
Predictions on what the committee vote will be?
I wouldn't make any predictions, but I think John Ashcroft will be fine. I think, you know, there are people who feel strongly against him, but I hope there aren't too many of them. But we'll just have to see what happens. And the committee, it's a very split committee in many ways, but it's what makes it a great committee too, because we have a lot of conflicts in that committee, a lot of debates, a lot of real roughhouse tactics from time to time. But I hope they're not going to happen on this one.
Senator Leahy, prediction on the vote in committee?
No, I don't have a prediction. I think most people predict that Senator Ashcroft will be confirmed. The Republican caucus has already announced they'll all vote for him. I mean, if you just did on those numbers, 50 Republicans plus Vice President Cheney, he wins. But I would hope that we would state our purpose and then either vote for or against him.
Quickly, one last question on the lasting impact of the rancor we've seen in your committee over the last few days.
Well, most attorneys can get very tough in court, get very tough up against each other, but when they walk out,
they have to get rid of it, because the next issue may be one where you've got to align yourself with others and get others to help you. And frankly, we do get into some real tough debates on that committee, but by and large, we get along pretty well.
You have to understand, Senator Hatch and I have been friends for well over 20 years. We were friends before this started. We'll be just as good friends after it's all over.
Senators Leahy and Hatch, thank you so much. Back to you.
Well, Gene, that's certainly a harmonious note on which to end those, at times, pretty tough hearings. We heard Senator Kennedy, we heard Senator Leahy putting some very challenging questions, shall we say, euphemistically, to John Ashcroft.
This is a day when bipartisanship is compulsory and notes of conciliation are. But you know, this lunch is taking place in the Capitol, and both chambers have, within a matter of a couple of days, we're going to hear some pretty tough battles.
You can hear the helicopters overhead. They are right where the protests are. We are, as we've been saying, on the 6th floor, the roof of the Labor Department building. These are some of the people who've been down there to demonstrate, to speak out for their cause. They're carrying signs. As Bernie was telling you earlier, there have been arrests today of several blocks from where we are. We are located at 3rd and C Streets Northwest. And it looks quiet now, but we can tell, because there hasn't been so much helicopter noise in the last few hours, that the security is very much watchful.
Go ahead, Bernie.
I was just going to say, these people in the streets have their agenda. Let's take you now to Andrews Air Force Base. John King had reported that former President Clinton would be making remarks here in the hangar before he departs and when he arrives in New York. Jeff, you were going to say something?
Well, it's just a sad sign, I guess, in Washington that every 4 years the security gets tighter and tighter. When I was a young man working in Washington, there were no metal detectors at the Capitol. Now there are checkpoints to even come on the mall to watch the inaugural. This is not one of the things that's gotten better over the last few decades.
This is the first time, in fact, that the Secret Service has been in overall charge of security at an inaugural. It makes it that much harder for just ordinary folk who want to come and watch and listen to get close to the Capitol. And we saw it was, what, 10 minutes before 12, people were still streaming in because security had slowed down the process.
Well, you know, it's rare, Judy, that you have this kind of protest. Most inaugurations don't see this kind of demonstration in the streets. I think it's something that's left over from this 2000 election, the anger, the differences over it. So this is unusual.
I think Nixon's second inaugural in '73 saw the biggest collection of protesters of any inaugural, mostly around Vietnam.
And that was Vietnam.
Yeah,
We don't have a war.
You're watching scenes from Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland. The Clintons are preparing to depart, having seen George Walker Bush sworn in and Al Gore watched as Dick Cheney was sworn in. And Mr. Clinton is going to speak at some point inside this hangar.
Candy Crowley, you covered George W. Bush for many months now. What does he think about Bill Clinton?
I asked him the legacy question the other day. What did George Bush think Bill Clinton's legacy will be? And he sort of paused and said, well, we don't write legacies. We won't be around for when we really see what it is. But I think he's a deft politician. I don't think it was meant as a particular compliment. Clearly, first of all, there is the matter that Bill Clinton did beat George Bush, the father. And clearly George Bush the son thinks that the better man lost. So there is that history. There is also the fact that George Bush believed that Bill Clinton did some things during office that did not bring honor to the office. So.
Randy, you respectfully stopped reporting while the national anthem was playing. You were saying?
Just talking about the relationship, or actually it's a lack of a relationship. They don't know each other that well, George Bush and Bill Clinton. But it was clear during the course of the campaign that the incoming president and the outgoing president were not ever going to have a lot good to say about one another. That having been said, I am told that the conversations between the two of them in today and in recent days have been gracious, and you know, although it's an awkward situation, obviously, because Bill Clinton wanted Al Gore to win, that they have been very civil conversations. So they got through it in fine fiddle. Never going to be close friends, though.
And very quickly, as the former president reviews the troops, John King, coming to you, this former president still has to be, what could you say, roiling over the fact that he did not see his vice president elected president, and he, Bill Clinton, feels that he was underused in the campaign.
He certainly does, Bernie. Now, he understands, of course, that he would have been quite a controversial figure in the campaign because of the impeachment debate, because of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. But he, A, thinks Al Gore underestimated George Bush's political skills, and B, he thinks that Al Gore veered too much from the New Democrat script, if you will, did not pay enough attention to economic prosperity, did not stress the accomplishments of the Clinton record, the Clinton-Gore record, because he believes the vice president was so conscious of the fact that if he stressed that record, others would draw the character comparisons. Mr. Clinton believes the vice president didn't handle the gun issue very well, and he believes most of all the vice president, we're told now these are conversations the president has had with friends and associates, he believes the vice president did not pay enough attention to his home state these past 8 years. Again, had Al Gore won the state of Tennessee, had Al Gore won Bill Clinton's state of Arkansas, had Al Gore won West Virginia, a Democratic stronghold, had Al Gore pulled out a victory in New Hampshire, a state Bill Clinton won twice, any of those, win one of those, and we're celebrating the Al Gore presidency today, not the George Bush presidency. Mr. Clinton knows his personal problems, his legal problems, were a major subtext in the campaign, but he also thinks his vice president didn't run a very good campaign.
In a word, John King, does Bill Clinton think Al Gore blew it?
Oh, I can't answer that question in one word, Bernie, because I don't think it's that clear to him. I think it believes it was a very complicated thing, but I know that many of those around President Clinton believe that perhaps Al Gore should give it another try in 4 years. There are other Democrats, though, already talking about spending some time in the spring in Iowa and New Hampshire.
Frank says no. As we watch Bill Clinton review the troops and perhaps say a few words, let's consider how the governing styles. Let's put that off until we hear what Bill Clinton has to say.
Yes, can you hear me?
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to Andrews Air Force Base. On behalf of the 89th Airlift Wing, it's our honor and pleasure to have you here this afternoon. In the month of March of this year, it will be 6 years since this officer standing in front of you had the honor to be selected to serve in the White House Military Office. And it was at that time, in the month of March in 1995, that Linda and I first came to know the President and the First Family. And it was a true honor indeed and a privilege, a unique one, to be able to serve. I will remember always being amazed at how intricate and how detailed all the support was that was provided by the military for the First Family. And when I left after the 96 campaign, Mr. President, I will always remember that, because we talked about the planes, the trains, the boats, and the buses, because you will remember President Clinton used all of those means of transportation as he campaigned across the country. And I will never forget going from Cape Girardeau, Missouri to Paducah, Kentucky on the bus run, a memorable occasion. Little did I know that in January of 1999, I would be selected to come back here to the 89th Airlift Wing to be in charge of all the airlift transportation for the President, his staff, and the White House as a whole. It's been a true honor for us to do that. And I would like to say on behalf of all the 6,000 men and women of the 89th Airlift Wing, we've taken great pride in providing you the safest, the most comfortable, and the most reliable airlift in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed my great honor and privilege to introduce to you now our 42nd President of the United States, the Honorable William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, first let me say on behalf of Hillary and Chelsea and myself, we thank you for coming. We're glad to see you. You know how it is when you leave the White House, you wonder if you'll ever draw a crowd again. So it was nice to come in here and see so many old friends. General Hawkins, thank you, and thank you, Linda, for your service in the White House and for your service here at Andrews. I would like to thank the Honor Guard and the representatives of all the military services behind us for rendering honors to me this one last time on this important day in our country's life. When I was walking down the rows, looking at the young men and women who were standing behind me, I thought again how fortunate we are to have people of their caliber willing to sacrifice and serve the United States, and being their commander-in-chief was one of the great honors of my life. Let's give them another hand. They were great. Now let me say to all of you, I had a very good morning, and I think we all did. We had sort of a bittersweet goodbye at the White House. We went around and said goodbye to all the staff there, took a last look at all the rooms, welcomed Vice President Mrs. Gore, and then President Mrs. Bush and Vice President Mrs. Cheney and Andy Card, the new White House Chief of Staff. We had a nice little visit, and then we went down to Capitol Hill together and conducted the inaugural ceremonies as prescribed by the Constitution of the United States. I was really grateful that the band was here today. Some of you have heard me say that one of my great fears is that I won't know where I am for 4 or 5 months because I'll walk into a big room and no one will play a song anymore. But I want all of you to know that I feel, as John Podesta did, we walked out of the Oval Office for the last time today, about 10:30. And about 10 o'clock, and he was tearing up a little bit. He just said, "We did a lot of good. We did a lot of good." We did a lot of good. The whole we did a lot of good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I gave my farewell address the other night on television, and I even did a radio address this morning. And we gave out our last chunk of money for community police so that when I left, When I left, we gave out money for 10,000 more police, and I said, you know, when I ran, I promised you 100,000 police, and this is 110,000. We gave 110% effort for 8 years. And I just want to say how grateful I am to all of you. There are people here who've held major positions in this government, people here like John Sweeney, without whom we could not have won elections or waged our battles. Thank you, sir. There are people here I've known all my life, and people here I met in the course of running for president, and people here who are here because they worked in this administration and they believed in what we were doing. But the whole nature of public service is by definition a reflection of the nature of life. It is passing, it has seasons, it is a process, not a destination. The work of this country will never be over, and no one will ever get to do it forever, and that's not all bad. We have been very fortunate that the system under which we live has given all of us a chance to live as we have, to work as we have, to serve as we have, and to see our country and the world so much better off. It was a great gift to us, and we should not be sad today. We should be grateful today, and happy, and full of belief and hope for our country. I don't want to start calling names, or I'm afraid I'll never stop. But I do want to thank one person in particular for coming out here today and for meaning so much to me these last 8 years. Senator Chuck Robb, thank you for being here. You are a wonderful man. Thank you. Thank you. So, now we have to go on to the next chapter in America's life and our lives, and our struggle to do the things we all believe in. I will always feel good about this, and you made that possible. So you see that sign there that says, please don't go? I left the White House, but I'm still here. We're not any of us going anywhere. And that's the only thing I ask of any of you. If you really believe in what we did these last 8 years, you do not have to be in a position of power in government to advance those causes. And the celebration we mark today is ordained under a Constitution in which the people are supposed to be in the driver's seat. I'm glad to go back to be one of the people. Maybe for the first time in 8 years, I'll be in the driver's seat in a way I never was. Whatever happens, I think I can speak for all of us. We are profoundly grateful. You've got a senator over here who will be a voice for you. And I am very proud of her, and I'm very, very proud of Chelsea, and I'm very grateful to him. So, we're going to New York and spend the weekend, and then Hillary will show up promptly so as not to miss any votes and to fulfill the oversight function of the United States Senate. I wish the new president well. I wish his family and administration well. I wish our country well. And always, always, out of gratitude and affection, I wish you well. You gave me the ride of my life, and I tried to give as good as I got. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you.
Former President Bill Clinton giving an unprecedented goodbye speech to his supporters people who served in his administration. At one point, Jeff Greenfield and Bob Dallek, he said, "I left the White House, but I'm still here." This man does not want to walk off the stage.
I think to those people who had an abiding dislike, if not a stronger word for Clinton, in a sense, I almost think this was the last little thumb in their eye. You know, okay, it's noon, past noon, we have a new president, but just one more time, I want to demonstrate my skills to you and say what I've done, and we did a lot of good. There is a feeling even among his best friends that this guy was reluctant to leave the stage, and
well, it's not just a feeling. I mean, I think you're watching it right here.
And we've not seen the last of him. I think one can imagine him running for mayor of New York or senator from Arkansas. You know, he spoke about his two model figures for the post-presidential period, and one was Jimmy Carter and the other is John Quincy Adams. And we know that Adams served a long time in the House of Representatives.
He did say, he said, well, we're going to New York, but he said Hillary will be right back here, so she won't miss her first vote.
Quite so.
They won't miss a beat. Frank says no, you're still out there near the Capitol.
That's right, and watching this and Judy, reflecting on the very different styles and the lingering legacy that Bill Clinton will leave behind. When you compare him to George W. Bush, you really have the difference between a college professor in Bill Clinton who eagerly engages in an all-night seminar, and that's really what much of Washington has been through these last several years. You know, I reflect on the health care reform debate, the NAFTA debate, and these sorts of things. And the White House turned into a seminar room. We had briefings from the president. We had briefings from Hillary Rodham Clinton. He would stay up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning talking with his aides and with others who would listen. I remember occasions in the Roosevelt room where he was there and he almost literally, physically had to be pried out of the room by his aides who said it was time for him and for the rest of us, journalists and others in the room, to move on. George W. Bush is a much more relaxed man, much less intense, probably prone to be much less of a micromanager than Bill Clinton, who in those early days, as you recall, was said Clinton to virtually be going over the budget line by line. Washington is going to change very substantially as this man, Bill Clinton, leaves and as George W. Bush comes to town. But you know, you talk about Bill Clinton going up to New York and Senator Clinton arriving, I'd point out that they have a house here in Washington, and there are going to be times when Bill Clinton is going to be just up the street, and you can almost imagine him stepping out to the sidewalk or getting on the phone and saying, "Hey, if you need any help, here I am, happy to chime in."
And he began his remarks, as he works the crowd, we'll tell you, he began his remarks out at Andrews Air Force Base saying, you know, how it is when you leave the White House, you wonder if you'll ever draw a crowd again. So I'm grateful to all of you for being here. We're going to take a break as we watch the former president thank the people who've worked closely with him over the last 8 years. When we come back, we'll be talking, among others, with Billy Baldwin, the actor and the head of the Creative Coalition.
Sunday on CNN's Late Edition, the new White House Chief of Staff, Andrew Card, plus a look ahead to the first 100 days. Sunday, noon Eastern on CNN.
What's the most expensive part of a car?
The engine block?
No.
The transmission?
No, it's the interest. Finance just $15,000 and you'll be paying more than $4,400 in interest alone.
Well, right now at Landmark Ford, we're currently offering 0% financing on every new Ford in stock.
0%.
You can also choose to make no payments until May.
The only catch?
It's a limited time offer.
0% financing on every new Ford in stock.
Only at Landmark Ford.
Just off I-5 in Tigard.
Get more.
Spend less.
It's not the number of messages you throw out there, it's the number that hit their target that matters. Reach the people who count, your customers. Call AT&T Media Services and find out about cable advertising. Ask anyone who has used cable advertising and they'll tell you it's the best way to reach the people who buy.
Live Inauguration Day coverage tonight, 9 Eastern.
At BASF, we don't make the floor, we make it tougher. We don't make a lot of the products you buy, we make a lot of the products you buy better. BASF.
She's perfect. She has everything she needs, except $250,000 for college.
Start saving today with the new 529 College Bound Fund. It gives you the power of tax-deferred growth, the power of Alliance Capital, one of the world's premier investment managers. Learn about the 529 College Bound Fund today by calling your financial advisor or visiting collegeboundfund.com. So you'll be ready when she is. After all, she'll have a lot of competition.
He's actually going to land in, it's like the Metro line. If you'd have taken the Metro line, he could have...
Yes, he's still here. Former President Bill Clinton in a hangar at Andrews Air Force Base. He just spoke, and he is shaking hands with well-wishers and friends and former cabinet members. Kate Snow is out in the rain, out in the cold, in Freedom Plaza.
Yeah, we are out in the rain and the cold. It's probably around 40 degrees right now. It's been drizzling all day, but that hasn't stopped people from coming out. Now, there are a lot of Bush supporters out here along the parade route, but we wanted to show you that there are also some folks that are not happy with George W. Bush and his policies. Demonstrators that have come out to protest everything from the death penalty to abortion rights. Next to me here, a gentleman with a sign that says, "Hail to the thief." There are a lot of these signs out here. You came down from New York, you said.
Yeah.
Why come all the way down here?
Because I don't know. I feel that if you don't protest, that you're showing support for Bush, and I cannot show any support for Bush at all.
It's a long drive for you. You drove up through the night to get here?
Oh yeah, from like 10 o'clock. It's a long drive.
You said you've been here since 6:30 this morning. Some of these folks have been here for hours as well. You guys came up from Atlanta, Georgia. Why?
We just feel strongly about it. We don't think he's a legitimate president, and we're not going to sit back and let him become president easily.
You don't exactly have prime real estate. You're back here behind the band. The parade is going to be over there. I think our cameraman can pan over and show you where the parade route is. It's over that way on Pennsylvania Avenue. So we're sort of wedged in back here behind the main crowd, the folks that are supporting George W. Bush. And if we can come back here, why do you want to be out here even if he can't see you?
It's the best we can do. We actually worth a bunch of thousands of us who are in favor of our cause, which is anti-Bush. So I think we have a very good, I disagree with you, I think we actually have quite a number of us that are...
You think he'll notice you being here?
I hope he does, sure do.
We want to show you some video also of something that happened a short time ago here in Washington. A few blocks from where we are, up at 14th Street. It's in downtown Washington, about 4 blocks away from the parade route. There was some scuffling between the police and some of the protesters who come to Washington to protest George W. Bush. About 500 or more protesters. I was up there myself. There were a number of arrests made, although not too many, at least from what I saw. The police trying to keep things under control, telling folks, look, you're not supposed to be in the streets. You can come down and you can protest, but you have to do so peacefully. Certainly the folks where we are here by the parade route are very peaceful. They're just holding up their signs. They've gone through police security checkpoints in order to be here. Bernie, we'll toss it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Kate Snow. The District of Columbia's more than 3,000 member police force on duty this day, as well as the more than 2,000 U.S. Secret Service agents, about 1,000 in uniform, the FBI, Park Service Police, and a couple hundred police officers from surrounding Virginia and Maryland.
I know it may seem like the coverage of the Clinton farewell and now protest that we may have forgotten. We have not forgotten. This is George W. Bush's inaugural. We'll be covering the parade in full. They are still at lunch in the Capitol. But one of the things about former President Clinton that was most striking was his enormous affection for and the affection he received from the creative community. There was never been a president more in love with movies, and there was never been a Hollywood more in love with a president than with Bill Clinton. We're joined now by William Baldwin, an actor a member of a family who is to acting what the Bush or the Kennedy family, I guess, is to politics. He is also the head president, chair, CEO, which is it, Mr. Baldwin, of the Creative Coalition.
Currently, I'm a board member, originally a board member, now the president for the last 2 years.
And the Creative Coalition is a group within the creative community, actors, writers, directors. You know as well as I do that, and it's not just the perception but the reality, that the community is pretty overwhelmingly Democratic and liberal, yet you're here at the inauguration of President Bush. Tell us why.
Well, I think President Clinton just said it himself in his parting comments at Andrews, that the work of the American people is not done and is never done. And Regardless of the fact that George Bush was elected president, whether you believe that or not, or whether you like that or not, I was a Gore supporter, and I have problems with what happened down in Florida. But the work continues, and I represent an organization that does work in the areas of First Amendment rights, public education, and arts advocacy. And that has huge bipartisan support. I've been coming down here for 2 years as president every 5 or 6 weeks and meeting exclusively with Republican members of Congress. I haven't met with a Democrat in 2 years because I want to create an opportunity for members of the Republican Party to have access to the entertainment industry and find common ground so we could advance the agenda of these 3 issue areas: First Amendment rights, arts advocacy, and public education.
Of those 3 areas, is there any that gives you either special hope or concern? For instance, there are a lot of, on the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, a lot of Republicans tend to be opposed to that. What's your sense of the new president?
You know, I can't really get a clear reading on it right now. I'm a little bit concerned with appointments like John Ashcroft and moving more in a conservative, even a religious conservative direction. That does not bode well for free expression in the National Endowment for the Arts and government funding of the arts. But the Creative Coalition has been at the forefront of that battle, if you will, since Robert Mapplethorpe, and we've been one of the leaders that have successfully secured government funding for the arts, and we will continue to do so.
Yet one of the things, Mr. Baldwin, that struck me in this campaign is that in one sense, Al Gore and Joe Lieberman were much more critical of the Hollywood community than was George Bush. I don't recall him saying much of anything about that, and Senator Lieberman in particular was one of the fiercest critics of Hollywood.
That's true. I have a very close relationship with Vice President Gore and Senator Lieberman. I thought it was very interesting. I was at both conventions, and I thought it was interesting that at the Republican convention they were talking about the influences of popular culture, where at the Democratic convention they were talking specifically about video games, television, recording lyrics, and the movie industry. I'm concerned with President Bush having been elected. I'm worried about censorship. I'm worried about government regulation. I think we shouldn't be looking at it specifically as violence in entertainment. We should be looking at the issue as a youth violence issue, and at that table and finding solutions for that problem sits law enforcement and educators and parents and legislators and the entertainment industry. I think that there is a very active role that the entertainment industry can play, and I think that the entertainment industry is having an effect, not a direct effect, and it's not responsible for violence being committed by young people. But I think that if you're fed an overwhelming amount of inappropriate material at too young an age, it can lead to desensitizing and aggression and stimulus.
But one of the other point I'm getting at here is that it seemed to me that George W. Bush in his campaign was putting a lot of the culture war emotional to rest. He didn't make it a big issue. He didn't rail against Hollywood the way other people have. And as I said, Senator Lieberman and even Al Gore with the V-chip was much tougher on your community than the Republicans. And yet it did seem to me that, and I would make this hypothesis to you, that the overwhelming liberalism of the Hollywood community still led people to favor Gore and Lieberman, even though on your particular issues they may not have been as where you wanted them to be.
Mm-hmm. You know, I have to be honest with you. I agree with a lot of the opinions of and positions of Senator Lieberman. I do not think, and I was surprised that they were more aggressive in their rhetoric against the entertainment industry than was President Bush and Vice President Cheney. I can't really explain it, but I do agree that there is now enough evidence. There's mounting evidence that suggests that there is an indirect effect, and I don't think the result lies in government regulations or any form of censorship. I think the result lies in does the rating system work? Does the enforcement of the rating system work? The Creative Coalition is currently working on a media literacy program where we're going to teach parents and teach educators to teach children how to interpret the media that they ingest on a daily basis, whether it's video games or Hollywood films or television commercials.
All right, William Baldwin, president of the Creative Coalition. I think it's fair to say that the ranks of Hollywood are somewhat smaller at this inaugural than the last two, but I also think that's to be expected given the politics of our time. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Judy?
We are going to take a break, and we want to show our viewers where we are. We've been telling you we're sitting on the roof of the Labor Department building. It's actually a pretty cool tent that we're sitting in with a plexiglass back that allows us to look out on the Capitol. There we are. There's our tent. Even if we wave, you can't see us. It's a long shot. That's from our camera, I presume, on the west side of the Capitol.
And the CNN staff people who put this all together performed brilliantly.
They did. They've been working for weeks and weeks and weeks.
And we thank them profoundly.
And we thank them very much. We'll be right back.
You've awakened to the true power of e-business. Do you have the software to manage it? If not, consider this your wake-up call. Our software manages more e-businesses than anyone else on Earth. Hello, tomorrow. We are Computer Associates, the software that manages e-business.
Changing the world at the speed of light, touching everything we do. The global optical network is carrying the stuff of the world, and Corning is at its core. Corning, discovering beyond imagination.
Bernie.
The farewells continue in the hangar at Andrews Air Force Base. A very emotional President Clinton. Very appreciative for these people who've come out to say goodbye to him. Meanwhile, in the Capitol Rotunda, the dignitaries are eating. The 43rd President of the United States, George Walker Bush, in the presence of his parents, including George Herbert Walker Bush, the former president. And Gene Randall has posed the question, is this a case of father like son or vice versa? Here's his report.
Happy birthday.
Soon after George W. Bush began his presidential run back in 1999, he helped his father, the former president, celebrate his 75th birthday in Kennebunkport, Maine.
My dad has served as a great example for all of us who are lucky enough to be called his son and daughter.
An example the younger Bush in many ways followed in his path to the White House, though there were notable differences as well. As his father, George W. went to Andover and Yale. Each was head of the same fraternity. But during Vietnam, the son flew Air National Guard fighter planes in Texas. His father had been a World War II combat aviation hero. Each started a Texas oil business. Both failed in runs for Congress, the father for the Senate, the son for the House, before achieving electoral success later. The resume mismatch: by the time the elder Bush became president, he had been vice president for 8 years, with a background that included stints as congressman, envoy to China, and CIA director. Other than his time as Texas governor, George W.'s major mark was co-owning baseball's Texas Rangers. The team got a lot better, and a new stadium was built. During his father's White House years, he was a behind-the-scenes advisor. Stung by his father's defeat at the hands of Bill Clinton in 1992, George W. has always publicly denied his presidential bid was an effort to square things. Perhaps to dampen any talk of family entitlement, the dynasty theory, father and son were rarely seen together on the hustings. And if Bush the elder was a hovering off-scene presence, the younger Bush played it down.
This man is not a political consultant. He is a father. And I love him and respect him. And the advice I get from him is the advice a dad would give a son.
And so the attention paid to an awkward moment in New Hampshire.
This boy, this son of ours, is not going to let you down. He's going to go all the way and serve with great honor all the way.
The former president made a non-speaking appearance at the GOP convention and stumped for his son in the closing weeks of the fall campaign.
Barbara and I have made a decision. We have decided we are going to vote for George W. Bush for president of the United States.
With his son, he sweated out election night.
How do you feel, Mr. President, sitting here again?
Nervous and proud are the two words.
And the seesaw weeks that followed. And when the election was finally decided, flanked by his father's defense secretary, Dick Cheney, his choice for vice president, George W. Bush announced his first cabinet choice, Colin Powell, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under George Herbert Walker Bush. And late in December, there was a Florida reunion for the first father and son White House team since John Adams and John Quincy Adams almost 2 centuries before. Gene Randall, CNN, Washington.
A look back. Major Garrett has some news that the president, who's been president for not even 2 hours, has already done some business. Major.
Yes, Judy. The first act of the new president is to impose a moratorium on federal regulations. Not an unusual move, but one that clearly shows the new presidential powers being put to use straight away. Memo from Andy Card, the new chief of staff of the President of the United States, instructs all heads of the various government departments to put a moratorium on regulations that are in the pipeline. That is to say, regulations that are heading for official publication. That's when a regulation really begins to take effect in the U.S. government. Mr. Card instructs all agencies to halt those pending a review of all new cabinet level appointees and their various assistants. Also, Mr. Card instructs the various leaders of the agencies in the U.S. government that those regulations that have been published put on hold for 60 days pending another review. This is to allow the new president to take a look at all the regulations, many of which President Clinton promulgated in the final days of his presidency, give the new staff, the new heads of the various agencies of the federal government time to review them. There is an exception, Judy, and an important one, for any regulations that are believed to have an emergency need to deal with issues of health and safety. Those can proceed as planned. But any of those that fall out of that general parameter, a sharp review by this administration to take a look at them to see if they fit with their regulatory policy. A moratorium on all that have yet to be published, those that have been published, put on 60-day hold. Judy?
And Major, just to be clear, this is not an extraordinary move for him to have made.
It's not an extraordinary move on a day of tradition and ceremony. I would say this is one of the more familiar traditions of an incoming administration. Now, typically, it's more pronounced when a Republican replaces a Democrat or a Democrat replaces a Republican. There's less of this going on when it's a party-to-party transfer of government, but there is definitely a new attitude in this White House about regulations, a wait-and-see attitude in many respects to those that President Clinton promulgated in the final days of his office. That wait-and-see process has begun in earnest. Judy?
All right, Major Garrett at the White House. We are talking about George W. Bush in his many facets, and joining us now is Nick Lemon. He is a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. Some months back, an article that he wrote appeared titled "The Redemption. Everything Went Wrong for George W. Bush until he made it all go right." Welcome, Nick Lemon.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Tell us about the George Bush that you have known for many, many years.
When you say you have known for many, many years, incredibly slightly. I don't want to overstate this. It seems to me, I was thinking about this today watching his speech. I went back and reread his father's inaugural address. He's really different. I mean, there's this obvious name and DNA similarity, but the closer you get, the more different, profoundly different these two men look. The speech today was way to the right, I would say, of his father's speech back in 1989. I don't know if you all remember.
To the right?
To the right, and I'll tell you why. Father Bush really, in his inaugural address, bought into the familiar liberal critique of Reagan-era greed. And he spent quite a lot of that speech saying the country's gotten too materialistic. I'm not like that. He said, we are not the sum of our possessions. He really was accepting implicitly, though not by name, the liberal establishment's criticism of President Reagan. George W. Bush did none of that today. George H.W. Bush really sounded like the old Rockefeller moderate wing of the Republican Party, and George W. Bush, to my ears, didn't sound like that at all today. that wing of the party barely exists anymore.
How do you account for their being so different?
Well, partly just people are different, but you know, the most familiar theory, and there's a lot to it, is the father grew up in privileged Greenwich, Connecticut, going to private school. The son grew up in out of the middle of nowhere, Midland, Texas, going to public school. Greenwich was, of course, the bastion of moderate republicanism in those days, probably still is, and Midland, Texas is very hard-shell conservative, was then, is now. People are formed by the early years of their life, and the early years were quite different.
Nick, what in this speech constitutes the essential George Walker Bush?
Well, you know, I listened to this speech and I heard a lot of religion, really much more than most inaugural addresses. George Walker Bush is a very talented politician, probably more so naturally talented than his father, and he knows how to use phrases that speak to certain constituencies without sounding as loud to certain other constituencies. So in the comments that I've heard so far in the address, people haven't mentioned religion very much, but we heard about angels, we heard about prayer, we heard about the road to Jericho, we heard about a calling. The evangelical community in America, which is huge and which is the base of the Bush vote, heard those phrases, I think, loud and clear without there being as loud to non-evangelicals. I saw the whole speech as being an essentially religious and not moderate religious view of life.
Well, how does that fit in with what we were told, Nick Lemon, was going to be one of the main missions of this speech, and that is to reach out to those people who didn't vote for him? Well, you know, the whole unity business, and we've got to put the division behind us.
It was a unifying speech, too. Those two things are not contradictory if you're a good politician, and Bush is a good politician. The language of evangelical Christianity is absolutely a language of unity, healing, and compassion. So you can sort of kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, by speaking that language in a way that is loudly heard by a group we think of as quote-unquote the right, but expressing sentiments that we think of as quote-unquote the left. But there is no contradiction between being very religious and trafficking in these ideas of compassion and healing and unity and thinking about the poor. That's all, you know, straight out of the Bible.
Just to button this up, Nick Lemon, you started out saying you've known him for a long time, but only slightly. Tell us how you did know him.
I met him when he was at Harvard Business School, and I was at Harvard College for a very brief, fleeting encounter. So that was a long time ago, over 25 years ago. But I don't think that takes us to the level of old and dear friends. I have various mutual friends and so on, but I don't want to claim to be a person who knows George Bush intimately.
All right, Nick Lemon, staff writer at the New Yorker magazine. We won't make that claim, we promise.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for joining us today.
Throughout this historic day, presidential historian Robert Dallek has been watching these proceedings, reflecting on that piece from Gene Randall moments ago before the Nick Lemon.